A century ago, spiritual qi reawakened and became the most fundamental source of energy in the world. Under its influence, living beings evolved along two distinct paths. The first was wild ancestral regression, which enhanced physical strength. The second was spiritual mutation, which specialized in energy-based attacks. This transformation led humanity to develop a wide range of professions connected to spiritual creatures, including spiritual beast observers and spiritual beast material analysts. Someone was casually scrolling through his phone when he received a question asking what to do after being bitten by a thorned phantom spider. Resting on his bed, the silver-haired young man replied that there was no need to panic. The victim should drink plenty of hot water and lie down somewhere well ventilated to prevent the body from giving off an unpleasant odor. A paw suddenly reached toward him. Complaining about the heat, the creature introduced itself as Smarty, 100 questions beast. Smarty continued grumbling to the silver-haired young man, Lin Yuan, about how unbearably hot it was. Having heard that higher places were cooler, Smarty climbed onto Yuan's head, but Yuan stared at him as though he were an idiot since his head was hardly any higher. Smarty opened the window and became overjoyed when a breeze swept into the room. Elsewhere in the building, Yuan went about his household chores. Yuan was 18 years old and owned a small spiritual creature shop. Although people in that world could use spiritual qi to accelerate the growth of living organisms, such an ability remained an impossible fairy tale to him. He had been physically frail since childhood, and from the age of 8, he had been completely unable to sense the existence of spiritual qi. Unlike ordinary people, he could not use it to strengthen his body, much less form contracts with high-level spiritual creatures. He examined a species known as Leoira A. It was normal grade, with a quality ranking somewhere between common and low-level spiritual creature. Yuan realized that covering it with a cloth to block the sunlight was not enough. The weather was far too hot, and there was no way to cool the room. Smarty noticed that the moon lily was about to wither. As the lowest-level healing spiritual plant, it had no competitive value whatsoever. It was considered even less useful than the green vines grown as fodder. In the world that emerged after the revival of spiritual qi, every spiritual creature was classified by grade and quality. Anything below copper grade was considered low-level. Almost no one was willing to invest resources in raising low-level spiritual creatures, since higher-level ones were comparatively much easier to evolve. After all, throughout the past 100 years, no one had ever heard of 100 questions beast successfully evolving. A bird-like flying creature named Een arrived with Yuan's medicine. She belonged to a species known as the sound bird. Yuan thanked Een with a body as frail as his, simply forming contracts with low-level creatures like Smarty, and Een left him dizzy for 2 full weeks. Sensing spiritual qi to nurture them and help them advance in level was even further beyond his reach. An hour later, the 3 of them were beginning to look bored. Smarty wondered whether humans enjoyed sleeping late, since there was still no one out on the street. Yuan had no idea what he was talking about. He then decided to attract some attention by announcing that they had green vines for sale. A little girl carrying a cat walked past with her mother. Both she and the cat in her arms, He noticed the 100 questions beast. Smarty welcomed them and offered them some green vines. He remarked that Smarty's fur was so dry and gray that he was obviously leftover stock and could not possibly compare to her. Naturally, Smarty took offense. He insisted that they belonged to the same species and challenged her to a game of rock, paper, scissors if she had the courage. Yuan told him to calm down. Besides, there was no way they could play rock, paper, scissors with paws like theirs. Instead, he suggested going for a walk to improve his mood. Since there were no customers anyway, they headed outside. Smarty suggested buying some meat. He tried to justify the idea by claiming that eating a little more braised pork would definitely make him smarter and prevent him from losing again. Yuan looked as though he was trying not to laugh. Een attempted to comfort Smarty by pointing out that even though he was not as intelligent as other 100 questions beasts, at least he was inexpensive. Smarty replied that hearing that only made him feel worse. Yuan, meanwhile, regretted his inability to sense spiritual qi. Smarty suddenly shouted for him to look to the left. To Yuan's surprise, a blind-tusk armored pig was standing nearby. He wondered why it had appeared so close to the park and suspected that something must have happened at the farm. Drooling, Smarty charged toward the wild mountain of braised pork that had seemingly appeared before him. Yuan immediately grabbed him, knowing that he would only get himself killed. There was no chance he could defeat. Yuan noticed that the armored pig was enraged. The species was naturally very docile, so what Smarty had done should not normally have provoked such a violent reaction. Yuan ran as fast as he could while the armored pig chased after them. He felt far more exhausted than usual. Hearing his strained breathing, Smarty asked whether he was all right. Then, without warning, Yuan stumbled. He pulled Smarty tightly against his chest to protect him. Een, despite being visibly terrified, moved to protect Yuan as well. Smarty did the same, preparing himself to face the braised pork pig. Feeling as though he was about to lose consciousness, Yuan told them to run. Without warning, Yuan's consciousness was drawn elsewhere. Someone called his name, and a large copper bracelet appeared before him. He recognized it immediately. It was the bracelet he had lost when he was 8 years old. It had vanished after coming into contact with his blood. Then, a beam of light traveled toward his wrist. As the bracelet began shining brilliantly, Yuan felt a sensation he had once known well. It was spiritual qi. He had been unable to sense it since the age of 8, but now it had finally returned. Yuan slipped the bracelet onto his wrist and rose to his feet. Smarty, who was still being chased by the armored pig, noticed that he had awakened. Yin urged Yuan to think of something. Yet even with the small amount of spiritual qi now available to him, there was not enough time to do anything. His wrist suddenly flashed, and Yuan's left eye lit up at the same time. He saw a status window displaying the armored pig's information. Its name was Z. It was a normal grade, level 3 defense type creature with normal domain quality. Yuan quickly analyzed the information. Realizing that it was level 3 made him uneasy, since Smarty and the others had not even reached level 1. He warned Smarty to dodge because the attack would come from the right, but that was not enough. Even though Smarty narrowly avoided the strike, the difference in strength remained overwhelming. Yuan needed more power. He wished for the bracelet to bind itself to him. Yuan then unleashed sound waves in retaliation for Smarty's injury. Yuan realized that the light was identical to the glow surrounding Yin. Both Smarty and Yin began to shine. He concluded that the bracelet's power was causing them to evolve. The armored pig let out a deafening roar. Smarty struggled to keep himself from being blown away and asked Yin how the pig's voice could possibly be louder than hers. Yuan knew that even after evolving, the gap between levels 1 and 3 would still be enormous. However, he also knew the pig's weakness. Smarty complained that this piece of braised pork was far too powerful. Yin asked Yuan what they should do. He told her to sing and draw the pig's attention. Any note would work as long as it was loud enough. She gave it everything she had, and her painfully off-key singing disrupted the pig. Fortunately, Yuan had already grown immune to it after serving as her practice partner more than 400 times. The pig shifted its attention to Yin and began chasing her instead. She realized that she had become Smarty's replacement. Yuan instructed her to turn around and target the pig's eyes. Once it could no longer see, it would stop. Yin prepared to activate an ability. Her body lit up, but the attack never came. Confused, she wondered why she could no longer use that move. Yuan's spiritual power had run dry at the worst possible moment. He desperately begged the bracelet to hold on for just a little longer. Yin felt the energy return and immediately continued her attack. She commanded her feathers to cover the pig's eyes. While the pig struggled to shake them off, it was Smarty's turn. He launched himself at the enemy and aimed for one precise spot, its nose. The pig tried to retreat but ended up crashing into Smarty and leaving him dazed. Smarty asked Yuan whether they had won. Barely able to remain standing, Yuan told him they had. Against all odds, they had successfully driven the pig away. Yuan then lost consciousness, sending Yin and Smarty into a panic. The pig fled as fast as it could, but suddenly came to a halt when someone stepped into its path. A man sat in a wheelchair with a beast resting on his lap while a woman assisted him. He wondered why a blind-tusk armored pig had appeared there. The woman's eyes widened when she noticed a feather clinging to the pig's body. She immediately recognized it as belonging to the small creature from Yuan's home. She told old Li to handle the armored pig while she went to find Yuan first. Li urged her to hurry. His eyes turned red as he borrowed the power of his beast. Yuan's consciousness returned to that mysterious place once again. He had long since lost track of how much time he had spent wandering through it because everything felt like a dream. This was the space where the bracelet resided. He thanked it for sharing its spiritual power with him during the crisis. As though responding to his gratitude, the bracelet shone brightly. Yuan estimated that the space covered roughly 40 to 50 square meters. He wondered whether this was the internal space of a spiritual creature and whether it represented the creature's ability. Yuan examined the status screen of his spiritual creature, Mobius. It belonged to an unknown species and was a normal grade, level 1 creature with spatial and mystical attributes. Mobius possessed two basic abilities. The first was True Data, which revealed hidden information beyond what ordinary eyes could perceive. The second was Calm Mind, a passive ability that stabilized the spirit and became increasingly capable of resisting negative conditions as it leveled up. Yuan had already witnessed the power of True Data and suspected that Calm Mind had developed from helping Yin practice her singing. What truly surprised him, however, was that Mobius possessed an exclusive trait. Normally, only creatures that had reached bronze rank could acquire one. The fact that a normal grade creature possessed an exclusive trait made Yuan wonder whether Mobius was a divine treasure, a legendary being, or the descendant of some extraordinary bloodline. Its unique characteristics allowed it to house house spiritual creatures whose initial level did not exceed its own. Mobius could only level up when the creature housed within it advanced, and it would copy that creature's initial ability without gaining any new abilities through evolution. Each rank advancement would also increase its housing capacity by 1. After reading the description, Yuan realized that he could currently contract only a normal grade level 1 spiritual beast. Mobius would not level up until he cultivated that beast. To form another contract, he would first need to raise the level 1 beast until it advanced in rank, which occurred at level 10. Raising low-rank spiritual beasts was already prohibitively expensive. At this rate, even a wealthy person would quickly go bankrupt, let alone someone like him who had no money at all. Still, Yuan tried to remain optimistic. This was better than having nothing. At the very least, he could now sense spiritual power, and perhaps one day he would have the opportunity to change his fate. Suddenly, he heard someone ask the doctor why he had still not awakened after half a day. The doctor replied that the diagnosis showed only mental shock and physical weakness. Yuan recognized the speaker as Aunt Jiang, his next-door neighbor, and realized that it was time to return. When Yuan opened his eyes, Een was pecking at him while Smarty repeatedly struck him in an attempt to wake him. He sat up and assured them that he was fine, asking why they were so worried that they could barely speak properly. Aunt Jiang was visibly relieved to see him awake at last. The doctor explained that she had been extremely concerned and recommended another examination as a precaution. Yuan insisted that it was unnecessary, but Aunt Jiang reminded him that he had been unconscious for nearly 10 hours. She scolded him for neglecting his health, warning that illnesses had to be treated before minor problems developed into serious ones. Left with no choice, Yuan agreed and lay back down. Uncle Leon Jiang, his neighbor, had always taken excellent care of both him and his younger sister, but Yuan decided not to reveal his contract with Mobius just yet. When the doctor summoned his beast, its information appeared before Yuan. The spiritual creature was a purifying Vimba of the Cyperni Crino species. It was an elite grade, level 4 water-type creature of elite quality. Possessed 2 abilities. The first was Tail Strike, which allowed it to leap forward and attack with its tail. The second was Purification, which gently absorbed nearby mental trauma to alleviate abnormal mental conditions. As expected of an elite grade creature, it possessed an exceptionally rare ability. After confirming that Yuan was fine, the doctor left, since his wife was waiting for him at home for dinner. Old Li's red and white beast arrived carrying dinner. Li had prepared the nutritious meal especially for Yuan. Aunt Jiang did not force him to eat, but naturally he did not dare refuse. Smarty and Een immediately became excited. The food smelled wonderful, and it was braised pork. When Yuan saw the rabbit, he recalled how mysterious the creature had always seemed. It was nowhere near as lively as other terror rabbits. Driven by curiosity, he examined it, only to find that every piece of information was displayed as a question mark. Yuan then realized that it was not a terror rabbit at all. After recovering, he went outside for a run. Yuan was already out of breath. Ever since leaving the hospital, he had been running for an hour every day, but the exercise was still extremely demanding for him. Since he had lacked spiritual chi, he had been forced to strengthen his body from a young age. Perhaps he should also abandon any hopes of pursuing a combat profession and consider a lifestyle profession instead. Uncle Li and Aunt Jiang had gone out to buy vegetables and encountered him on their way back. Uncle Li asked whether he had woken up early to exercise, and Yuan replied that he was trying to stay healthy. Yuan then used his ability on Uncle Li and discovered information about bone-devouring worms. They originated from a rotten bone silkworm of platinum rank or higher. The creature possessed a biological toxin element that inflicted a mental curse. The rotten bone silkworm burrowed into the flesh and sacrificed itself to produce a dark green, bone-devouring toxin. Uncle Li had kept such a powerful poison sealed within his leg for years. Yuan concluded that he had to be at least king rank. If that was true, he suspected that Uncle Li's beast had also been injured and had assumed its current form to recover. One thing was certain, Uncle Li was concealing tremendous power. He and Aunt Jiang told Yuan to call them if he needed anything, while Yuan asked them not to worry so much about him. They had looked after him for many years, making him wonder whether there was a way to heal Uncle Li's injury, and whether he might be capable of doing it himself. Yuan changed his clothes and headed to his shop. The first creature he examined was a green vine, a member of the creepvine subgroup within the Hexa family. It was a normal grade, level 1 grass-type creature of normal quality. Yuan was stunned to discover that it had become elite, even though its quality had still been normal only the day before. Yuan realized that his spiritual chi was leaking from his body. He was unconsciously channeling that power into the spiritual creatures, allowing them to absorb it and evolve. He decided to attempt something more difficult by transforming the green vine into a healing-type blonde lily. The creature changed shape. When Yuan examined it again, it had become a Lara lily of the Casual Tassi family and the Omnium genus. It was an elite grade, level 1 wood-type creature of of normal quality. It possessed healing, an ability that restored external injuries, and fragrance, which released a fresh herbal aroma capable of easing tension. Yuan was delighted to see that the transformation had succeeded. With those abilities, the creature was now worth at least 10 times more. He called Smarty and Eeneen over to take a look, and Eeneen happily announced that they had leveled up. Yuan immediately checked their attributes. Smarty, a 100 questions beast from the Felidae family and sapient cat genus, was now normal grade and had also gained a level. He was a psychic-type creature of normal quality. His ability, precise memory, allowed him to recall even the smallest details of anything he memorized. Smarty proudly declared that he had previously been able to remember only one piece of braised pork, but could now remember 30. Yuan then examined Een Yin's attributes. She was a sound bird from the warbler family and song-loving genus. She had reached normal grade, level 3, and was a sound-type creature with normal quality abilities. She demonstrated just how much her singing had improved, leaving Yuan overjoyed. He declared that he had finally discovered his golden finger and that they were going to become rich. Then he realized that this power represented far more than wealth. Evolving a spiritual creature was extraordinarily difficult. Aside from the small number that evolved naturally, most required a creator to spend enormous quantities of rare materials and precious medicines merely to create a chance of evolution once the creature reached its limit. Yet Yuan could accomplish all of that by himself. It was an unbelievable ability, one countless people would kill to possess. A single careless move could expose him, and as the saying went, the tallest tree caught the strongest wind. Yuan knew that he still lacked the strength to protect himself, so he resolved to keep his power secret. To use this ability safely, he would need to become a creator one step at a time. Using that profession as a cover was the only way to protect himself in the long run. Otherwise, he would simply be inviting trouble. Yuan was so absorbed in his thoughts that he failed to notice his phone ringing until Een and Smarty pointed it out. He remembered that someone was supposed to come and form a contract with her first spiritual creature. It was Xiaosu. She asked how he was feeling. Yuan replied that he felt much better than before and also planned to clean up the courtyard. His answer surprised her. Worried that he had no spiritual qi to support his body, she told him to leave the courtyard alone until she returned home. Yuan assured her that it was nothing serious and that he only intended to do a little tidying. He told her not to worry and reminded her of the promise they had made. She was supposed to study diligently at school and avoid wasting her talent. Xiaosu replied that she already understood and was determined not to disappoint him. Classes at her school would resume in 2 days, when the students would form contracts with their first spiritual creatures. It was an extremely important event. Although a spiritual creature's grade and quality were crucial, the spiritual qi professional's own level also affected its performance in battle. For combat professions, compatibility ranges differed according to type. Choosing a spiritual creature that did not match one's affinity would make forming a contract extremely difficult and could even damage the contractor's mental power. Even those pursuing lifestyle professions, such as craftsmen or weavers, needed years of deep familiarity with spiritual creatures before they could successfully fuse spiritual materials. Their class, however, was specifically designed to train combat professionals. This made the synergy between contracted spiritual creatures something that had to be considered with exceptional care. Once the lesson ended, Xiaosu was asked to remain behind. Her teacher asked whether she was willing to reconsider the spiritual creature she intended to contract. She knew about Xiaosu's family circumstances, but the girl's talent was extraordinary. With the selection of the Federation's 100 children approaching, the teacher urged her not to let such an opportunity slip away. Xiaosu was left feeling dejected after their conversation. Meanwhile, back at home, Yuan looked over his completed work with satisfaction. He had upgraded 300 moon lilies to elite quality. Together, they should be worth at least 20,000 Federation coins. With that money, he could purchase a higher-level spiritual creature for Xiaosu to contract. His phone suddenly rang. Since the number was unfamiliar, Yuan assumed it belonged to a new customer. The timing was perfect, as he had been preparing to close the shop for the day. He answered and asked who was calling. The person on the other end raised her voice and demanded to know whether he was Xiaosu's guardian. She explained that Xiaosu intended to contract a gray beetle and declared that doing so would waste her talent. Gray beetles were aggressive, normal-grade spiritual creatures sold for roughly 200 Federation coins. Their abilities were practically useless, and almost no one was willing to contract them. They were generally used only as food for high-grade insectivorous creatures. The teacher explained that Xiaosu's affinity range covered every defense-type spiritual creature. There were probably very few people in the entire Violet Thorn City who possessed talent of that caliber. She insisted that her guardian prepare an elite-grade defensive spiritual creature for Xiaosu's first contract. Yuan said that he understood and thanked her for the information. He promised to deliver a suitable spiritual creature to the school duel within 2 days. An elite-grade creature would cost at least 100,000 Federation coins, and time was running short. Yuan would have to upgrade every normal-grade green vine in his possession to elite quality and sell them all if he wanted to obtain a powerful elite defensive creature for Xiaosu. By the following morning, Yuan looked like a walking corpse after spending the entire night channeling spiritual qi, but he was relieved to have finished everything in time. The spiritual creature market was a dangerous place, so he even concealed his bracelet as a precaution. Yuan asked Smarty whether he was certain about coming along. Smarty insisted that he was and declared that the old claim about a good Smarty staying home to guard the shop no longer worked on him. Besides, bargaining was one of the responsibilities of a 100 questions beast. Yuan realized that Smarty had become stubborn and disobedient since evolving. Their transport soon arrived, and the conductor instructed everyone to remain behind the yellow line. The vehicle was pulled by a spiritual horse and looked nothing like the buses Yuan remembered. Smarty explained that this was because Yuan had read history books rather than modern transportation guides. A century after the revival of spiritual qi, spiritual creatures of every kind had replaced many of the old machines once made from steel. The conductor told everyone to hold on tightly before setting off. The vehicle moved incredibly fast, and Smarty ended up falling out of the window. Fortunately, Robo managed to catch him. Just in time. The conductor asked Yuan whether he was also heading to the spiritual creature market, adding that if he was, he had chosen an excellent day to visit. Yuan asked what made that day so special. The conductor wondered whether he had missed the news. A few days earlier, a dimensional rift had opened roughly 30 kilometers from Dizya County. The Violet Thorn Guard spent 2 full days and nights exterminating the aberrant insects that emerged from it and bringing the situation under control. According to reports, 1 squad remained stationed nearby. The rift had appeared directly beside a spiritual creature breeding base. Many of its creatures were killed or injured, and several employees who escaped were now selling the surviving wounded creatures at the market. That explained how the armored pig had managed to escape. The conductor said that several armored pigs had gotten loose and that he had purchased one cheaply the previous day. Once it was served, his entire family enjoyed a feast, while the remaining meat was hung up to cure. Yuan praised him for his good fortune and asked to be dropped off at the intersection nearest the stalls. The circumstances were perfect. Spiritual creatures that were severely wounded or incapacitated were unlikely to cost much, which meant there could be valuable opportunities waiting there. Yuan arrived soon afterward and began surveying the area. Smarty told him to leave everything else to him, then asked what kind of spiritual creature they needed and how much they could spend. Yuan explained that they were looking for an elite-grade defensive spiritual creature, which would likely cost at least 100,000 Federation coins. Smarty was stunned, since their savings amounted to less than 20,000. Yuan intended to trade the green vines and Lara lilies he had upgraded the previous night. A normal-grade green vine was worth between 1,500 and 3,000 Federation coins. Therefore, even trading 20 of them would not provide enough money. Several plants caught Yuan's attention, almost as though they were calling out to him. He could now clearly sense the instinctive attraction or rejection of nearby spiritual creatures. The softer their glow appeared, the friendlier their aura felt. He noticed clear lacarp, underworld orchids, snow lilies, and thousand-year jade hands. Yuan began wondering whether his affinity range was truly that broad. He possessed a strong affinity for healing and support types, while plant-type spiritual creatures seemed instinctively drawn to him. Xiaosu's affinity, however, was with defensive creatures. Smarty called Yuan over to show him something. The seller had initially demanded 80,000 Federation coins, but Smarty had bargained until the seller lowered the final offer to 60,000, while Smarty continued insisting on 20,000. The creature they were negotiating over was a tough-hide rabbit of the Lapor Attai species and Rodentia order. It was an elite-grade, level 1 defense-type creature of normal quality. Its ability, Hardened Hide, created a tough keratinized layer over its skin to block incoming damage. Yuan apologized to the seller for Smarty's reckless behavior. Smarty was displeased, claiming that he could have secured the rabbit for 20,000 if he had been allowed to continue bargaining. Yuan quietly suggested that they examine the other options first. The next creature was a land turtle of the Tetsudinii species. It was a defense-type creature of normal quality. Its ability, Expansion, enlarged its body while drawing its head and limbs inside its shell to block damage. Yuan judged that its level was far too low and that he did not have enough time to train it. Smarty added that it was also painfully slow. After that, they examined a phantom claw fox of the Vulpigosa species. It was an elite-grade, level 1 defense-type creature of normal quality. Its ability was called Rolling Defense, allowing it to curl its body into an arc and roll forward while using concentrated spiritual energy to block damage. It was not significantly different from the rabbit. Smarty also pointed out that the fox was too timid to protect anyone and suggested reconsidering the tough tough-hide rabbit. Yuan preferred to keep searching, since this decision required extreme caution. After examining everything else, they reached the final option, a spiral-horned sheep of the Caprini UU species. It was an elite-grade, level 7 rock-type creature of perfect quality. It possessed parry, which used its massive horns to block and defend against attacks, as well as horn charge, which allowed it to strike targets with tremendous force using those same horns. Among the herd, Yuan discovered a perfect quality lamb that also possessed a control-type spiritual beast ability. It had everything the others possessed except horn charge. In its place was shock horn, which allowed it to strike a target with vibrating horns and induce paralysis through high-frequency vibrations. Yuan decided that he wanted to purchase the lamb for 100,000 Federation coins. The seller asked him to wait while he called his wife to confirm the sale. Smarty told Yuan that he had checked the prices online the previous day and found that a spiral-horned sheep normally cost only around 50,000. Even a rare specimen would not exceed 90,000. Offering 100,000 was exactly the kind of mistake a novice negotiator would make. Yuan explained that he was merely demonstrating his sincerity and remarked that Smarty still had much to learn about negotiation. The seller eventually named his final price, 120,000 Federation coins. Both Yuan and Smarty found the amount outrageous. Yuan became discouraged since there were no other defensive spiritual creatures available. Under those circumstances, he might have no choice but to overpay for the spiral-horned sheep. Just then, another vendor announced that all his spiritual beast meat had sold out. However, the customers could still examine several critically injured spiritual beasts, which he recommended purchasing for slaughter. Yuan's eyes lit up at the mention of severely wounded creatures. Smarty reminded him that this was not the time to start thinking about braised pork. The man expressed sympathy for both the unfortunate creatures and the customers who had waited so long. He encouraged everyone to take a look, explaining that only 3 remained and guaranteeing that buying them would produce a profit. Most people walked away because they had come for meat that had already been slaughtered. They had no way to heal spiritual creatures and could not afford to hire a creator, so the offer held no appeal for them. Yuan approached the stall, but the vendor told him that he was too late. Everything had already been sold, and the stall would not be offering any more spiritual beast meat. Yuan clarified that he had not come to buy meat. He wanted to see the injured spiritual creatures. Yuan noticed that the owner appeared emotionally unstable and suspected that attempting to negotiate at that moment might get him thrown out. However, Yuan was no longer the same as before. He possessed the calm mind ability. When the vendor visibly relaxed, Yuan realized that it had taken effect. The man said he was not that old and told Yuan to call him Brother Yang. 3 critically injured spiritual creatures remained, so Brother Yang led Yuan over to inspect them. The first 2 were web-shooting spiders. From the front, they appeared relatively healthy, but their abdomens had been torn open. In that condition, neither would survive for more than 2 days. Smarty complained about the smell. The web-shooting spider belonged to the Aeroranium Orphi aeroronii species. It was a normal-grade, level 10 poison-type spiritual creature of perfect quality. Its first ability was thread spinning, which allowed it to release sharp, nearly invisible strands of webbing along its path of movement. Its second ability, Venomous Web, launched a web infused with toxins. Yuan knew that without the dimensional rift, the spiders would soon have advanced to copper rank. They were an exceptional find. Had they been healthy, each one could have sold for approximately 300,000 Federation coins. The vendor explained that support-type spiritual creatures with both control and poison abilities could be worth even more. In their current condition, however, he would be fortunate to receive 150,000 for the pair. Yuan said that he wanted to purchase both web-shooting spiders, but since he did not currently have enough money, he proposed exchanging spiritual creatures for them instead. Brother Yang explained that after disposing of this remaining stock, he intended to establish a new spiritual creature breeding base and begin again from the ground up. As a result, he might not need whatever creatures Yuan offered in exchange. Privately, he assumed that Yuan was merely making childish claims and regretted allowing himself to become hopeful. Yuan asked whether elite-grade green vines might change his mind. The vendor immediately asked whether Yuan truly intended to trade elite green vines and requested to inspect their quality. Confident in what he had to offer, Yuan invited him to visit the shop and examine them personally. Brother Yang knew how valuable elite-grade green vines were. Anyone willing to sell them would normally demand twice the market price. Therefore, he showed Yuan the final spiritual creature. They had devoted all their effort and care to raising it. It was a rock rhinoceros of the bovite bison species, an elite-grade, level 10 Earth-type creature of epic quality. Its first ability, Rock Horns, coated its horns in stone before it launched a ferocious, self-destructive charge. Its second ability was Sacrifice, which caused it to voluntarily absorb part of the damage whenever its contractor was injured. Yuan's eyes lit up the moment he saw it, and he immediately asked for the price. It was an outstanding choice, an epic quality creature on the verge of of reaching copper rank. More importantly, it was a defensive type, making it perfect for Xiaosu. Brother Yang asked whether Yuan was serious, warning him that the creature was in poor condition. Yuan replied that it was perfect and offered to purchase it for 200,000 Federation coins. Brother Yang asked whether Yuan had a way to heal the rock rhinoceros. He began to suspect that the young man might have a powerful creator supporting him. Brother Yang confirmed that Yuan intended to take all 3 creatures in exchange for elite grade green vines. Yuan assured him that the vines would not disappoint him, while Smarty added that Yuan never lied. Brother Yang chose to trust him. Since Yuan was taking all 3 creatures, he could close the stall, after which they would go together to inspect the green vines. Fortunately, he already had a spirit-locking box with him. He simply placed the rock rhinoceros and both web-shooting spiders inside it. When he tossed the box onto the ground, it expanded in size. Smarty asked what it was, and Yuan explained that it was a spirit-locking box, a patented invention developed by Ostrich Logistics. It could store spiritual creatures inside, automatically adjust their size, and eliminate their weight, making transportation light and convenient. Smarty was stunned that something so extraordinary existed and asked why they had never used one before. Yuan replied that his family had never possessed enough spare money to afford such a thing. The rock rhinoceros then entered the box. Smarty could hardly believe that something so enormous could truly fit inside it. Brother Yang felt a pang of sadness as he considered that the rhinoceros might never have the opportunity to advance to Cobra rank, just like the Cobra rank spirit box. He then summoned his moral-crested fire lizard. It belonged to the lizard family and the horned lizard genus. It was at Cobra rank, level 7 out of 10, and possessed normal quality. Its abilities included disposable fangs, which allowed it to detach its teeth during a bite and leave them embedded in the target's body, and death roll, which caused it to rotate its body violently after biting down, using its jaws as an axis to tear through flesh. It also possessed an exclusive trait called burning venom. Its highly developed venom glands were connected to its salivary glands, infusing its saliva with a scorching toxin. The lizard affectionately pressed itself against him. Brother Yang was extremely proud of the spiritual creature and asked whether Yuan also found it impressive. Yuan was impressed enough to examine it carefully. It was a rare opportunity to observe a Cobra rank spiritual creature from such a close distance. Its burning venom trait granted it a formidable offensive advantage. Brother Yang found it remarkable that someone so young had already mastered the specialized knowledge of a spiritual creature researcher. He concluded that if the boy was not a natural prodigy, then he must have a master guiding him. He became convinced that he had made the correct decision. Suddenly, someone called out to Brother Yang. Several nearby vendors complained that he had summoned the moral-crested fire lizard without warning. Even the tough-hide rabbits had become too frightened to eat, and the same was true of the fairy monkeys. Brother Yang apologized and assured them that they were leaving immediately. Yang, Yuan, and Smarty climbed onto the moral-crested fire lizard and sped away. It was considerably faster than a cart pulled by thick-hoofed donkeys. They soon reached their destination, and Brother Yang remarked that Yuan's shop was much closer than he had expected. He also noted that Yuan appeared to be in excellent physical condition, since most people became sick the first time they rode a creature like that. For Yuan, however, the experience was nothing extraordinary. The true thrill had come from riding a flying spiritual creature and looking down upon the world from above. Although both Yuan and Smarty looked nauseous after the journey, Yuan still thanked Brother Yang, since it was his first time riding a copper rank spiritual creature. He opened the door, warned that the place was rather modest, and invited Brother Yang to make himself comfortable. Brother Yang quietly surveyed the surroundings and noticed that it did not resemble a place where a creator would live in seclusion. If the boy's green vines failed to meet his expectations, the agreement would be cancelled. Business was business, after all. Those thoughts vanished the moment he saw the green vines. He became completely convinced that a creator was involved, since cultivating elite-grade green vines of such exceptional quality would be impossible without one. They far exceeded his expectations. These were genuinely premium quality specimens, rare goods that few merchants could obtain on the market. Before the green vines evolved, energy had been infused into the soil, allowing their root systems to develop fully, so Yuan was confident that their quality was flawless. When Brother Yang saw how rich the sap from the cut stem was, he realized that the boy had not exaggerated when describing them as top-tier elite-grade vines. Hope rose within him as he began to believe that his luck was finally changing. He recalled his previous experience visiting a master creator. To secure their assistance, one had to offer spiritual materials that interested them. With his current status, obtaining such materials was impossible. For that reason, he decided to build a closer relationship with Yuan. Yuan asked whether he was satisfied with the green vines, and Yang replied that he was extremely pleased and that it was time to discuss the price. He acknowledged that every green vine was elite grade and of premium quality. On the market, they would quickly sell for 30,000 Federation coins each. His best offer was 3,000 per pot, and he wanted to purchase 100 pots. Smarty was shaken by those figures and immediately began calculating. Yuan accepted the offer without hesitation. He needed a large quantity precisely to raise the level of his spiritual qi profession, and green vines were the most convenient method. It was an enormous transaction, yet Yang noticed that the young man remained perfectly calm and composed. He assumed that Yuan must already be accustomed to handling major deals. He began to suspect that the simple clothing and modest shop were merely a disguise arranged by the powerful figure supporting him. Yang asked how many days Yuan would need to prepare the order. Yuan replied that he required 7 days. He arrived at that estimate because each pot took roughly an hour. He had only 2 days before delivering the spiritual creature to Xiaosu, and he still needed time to rest. Meanwhile, Yang felt that his misfortune had become a blessing in disguise and that his luck had finally turned. After the exchange involving the rock rhinoceros, the ox, and the green vines, Yuan told him to return in 7 days to collect them. Yang asked whether Yuan was certain that he did not want an advance payment for the remaining 70-plus pots. Yuan replied that they could settle the entire amount when Yang returned to collect the goods. Yang promised to come back in 7 days, and Yuan said he would be waiting. After that, it was time to handle the most troublesome task. Yuan placed the rock rhinoceros in the courtyard. Yin asked whether it would be living with them permanently. Smarty replied that they could not afford to keep it, while Yuan said that their first priority was saving its life. The rock rhinoceros was already critically weak, so Yuan needed to act quickly. Yuan used his ability and watched as the rhinoceros's wounds slowly began to heal. Once he confirmed that it was working, he increased the pace by releasing more power. The rock rhinoceros began letting out loud cries, and Yuan wondered what was happening. It looked as though the creature's body had been encased in crystal. He suspected that this was the barrier preventing it from advancing to Cobra rank. They continued the process until dusk arrived. Night soon fell, yet they were still working. Yuan remained beside the massive creature, helping it break through the invisible wall. At last, a crack appeared, followed by an eruption of powerful energy. They had succeeded. The rock rhinoceros evolved into an iron-horned rhinoceros ox of the giant horn family and ox genus. It had reached Cobra rank, level 1 out of 10, becoming a metal-type creature of normal quality. It possessed rock horn, an ability that coated its horns in reinforced metal before, launching a reckless, self-sacrificial charge. It also retained sacrifice, which allowed it to actively absorb part of the damage whenever its contractor was injured. For its exclusive trait, Yuan could choose between scaled hide, which formed a layer of scale-like armor across its skin, using the same material as its body, tireless march, which reduced stamina consumption while running, or pain siphon, which absorbed part of the damage it suffered and converted it into life force. Yuan struggled to decide which exclusive trait to select, since 2 of the 3 options were exceptionally useful. An ability like tireless march was completely useless for a defensive spiritual creature. For scaled hide, it would form a relatively thick layer of scales across the creature's body and further increase its defense. The friction generated by those scales could also inflict some additional damage during a charge, making it an appealing option. Pain siphon, however, would allow the creature to absorb part of the damage it received while simultaneously healing itself. It was practically designed for a durable brute that invited its enemies to attack. Becoming increasingly resilient the more damage it endured was truly extraordinary, so Yuan chose that option. Now, the creature's status was complete. If Yuan properly combined rock horn with pain siphon to create a positive feedback loop, it would no longer be merely a defensive creature. Instead, it would become a heavy offensive powerhouse wrapped in defensive armor. It was the perfect first spiritual creature for Xiaosu, and Yuan was certain that no one would dare approach her now. Smarty jokingly remarked that Xiaosu and the iron-horned rhinoceros would make a perfect Beauty and the Beast pairing, but Yuan did not care. Xiaosu's safety was what mattered most. Besides, Yuan pointed out that Smarty was a beast himself. At the same time, Yuan felt his spiritual power increase once again. Beyond the iron-horned rhinoceros's evolution, Yuan discovered that the higher the level of the spiritual creature he evolved, the greater the amount of spiritual power returned to him. Helping the rhinoceros break through to copper rank had consumed nearly all his strength. The outcome might have been different for a high-level creator using all kinds of heavenly and earthly treasures. Yuan could not help wondering how far his ability might eventually allow a creature to evolve. Drenched in saliva from the iron-horned rhinoceros's enthusiastic licking, Smarty asked how Yuan intended to send it to Xiaosu. Yuan replied that he would use ostrich logistics. He had just earned some money, and because time was short, he placed an express air delivery order. They would arrive to collect the creature soon. Smarty became excited upon hearing this, as he wanted to fly through the sky like Yin. Meanwhile, inside Huiyui Palace, someone instructed that 3 portions of patulous sprouts, 1 portion of sunken sea sea ebony, and 1 portion of platinum-grade beast blood essence be used. Everything was placed inside a flask. A military officer asked the city lord what they were witnessing, but the dignified woman beside him warned him not to speak out of turn. A solid object was then dropped into the flask, causing powerful energy to surge throughout the surrounding area. Afterward, a blonde-haired woman added a crimson liquid, and thick red smoke spread across the room. Merely watching the preparation placed the 2 people behind her under immense pressure. The force was even pushing back their protective spiritual auras. They had just witnessed the work of a 5-star creator. The creator instructed them to summon the spiritual creature they wished to evolve. She was the Moon Empress, one of only 3 5-star creators in the Radiant Federation. The man named Xiong, a king-level expert, finally felt relieved. Lin Xiao, the lord of Violet Thorn City and another king-level expert, smiled and assured him once more that he had nothing to fear. Xiong thanked the Moon Empress before summoning his spiritual creature. She poured the contents of the flask over it, a black tiger marked with crimson patterns across its belly. Xiong immediately became concerned, but the Moon Empress reassured him that everything was fine. She explained that the creature was merely evolving to legendary quality. Once Xiong fused it with the willpower rune he had comprehended, it would advance into a fantasy bloodline. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he swore to serve her like a loyal dog, declaring that he would cross fire and water and die 1,000 deaths on her behalf. The spiritual creature's eye began to change. It released a thunderous roar, awakening a fluffy rabbit with a crescent moon marking on its forehead. The moment it saw the rabbit awaken, the black tiger covered in crimson markings began trembling. The Moon Empress said there would be no need for him to cross fire and water. She then raised the subject of creator selection. Promotion examinations were held only once every 3 years, and candidates could advance by only 1 level at a time. Under such a system, it was impossible to identify truly gifted creators. Sikong asked whether she was proposing that candidates be allowed to attempt several levels consecutively during that year's examination. She clarified that the change would apply only to advancement from level 1 to level 2. Anyone who passed the level 1 creator examination within 2 hours would be exempt from 3 lifestyle profession examinations and permitted to take a level 2 examination immediately. She ordered him to put the new rule into effect, and he agreed. Xiao asked whether this decision had been prompted by the lack of exceptionally talented young candidates in the Federation's creator examinations over the past several years, with none of them managing to comprehend even a single willpower rune. The Moon Empress explained that it was merely a personal matter. Both the Bamboo Lord and the Kitchen Sovereign, fellow 5-star creators, had already accepted apprentices. Naturally, she had no intention of falling behind those 2 old fools. Xiao was surprised to learn that the Moon Empress intended to take on an apprentice. The Moon Empress then added that the dimensional tide was approaching. Violet Thorn City had the highest number of aberrant insect dimensional rifts. As its ruler, the city lord had to fulfill her duties diligently and protect both the land and its people. Every rift was to be closely guarded, and failure was not an option. Tile, the city lord, assured her that she would protect Violet Thorn City. Meanwhile, Yuan was soaring high above the ground. The conductor asked whether he was all right and assured him that the flight would become steadier once they rose above the clouds. Yuan fought back the urge to vomit. The conductor remarked that Yuan's 100 questions beast seemed remarkably lively. Unfortunately, they were carrying too much weight on this trip. Otherwise, they could have brought him along. Earlier, Smarty had caused a scene because he wanted to fly but was unable to join them. Ineen held him back and argued that he was already flying whenever he rode with her. Yuan promised to bring him something delicious when he returned. Yuan told the conductor that it was fine, since there would be plenty of other opportunities. He was then informed that they had arrived and could now enjoy the scenery. The view was breathtaking. Moonlight shimmered across the river, giving it an almost magical appearance. Yuan agreed that it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. At that moment, he felt something beginning to condense within his sea of consciousness. He wondered whether it could be a willpower rune. A willpower rune embodied the essence of a particular attribute that a spiritual chi professional comprehended through observing the natural world. It could be regarded as an indispensable element in cultivating a fantasy bloodline. When Yuan held the willpower rune in his hands, he became certain that it truly represented mountains and rivers. He began considering which types of spiritual creatures would be compatible with it. His thoughts were interrupted when the conductor asked whether he was all right. Yuan assured him that he was. He then asked how much longer it would take to reach Violet Thorn City, since they had already been flying through the mountains for quite some time. The conductor told him that they would not arrive until morning. Yuan was surprised, as he had expected to reach the city before dawn. The conductor explained that because Yuan had accompanied them and become ill at the beginning of the flight, he had been forced to reduce their speed. Yuan told him not to worry and to continue at full speed. The conductor immediately immediately followed his instructions. At the academy, the students were confused. They were supposed to form contracts with their spiritual creatures that day, yet they had instead been gathered on the training grounds. One student explained that the schedule had changed. Immediately after forming their contracts, they would participate in a practical combat lesson. Everyone was surprised that the exercise had been moved forward so drastically. Rumors suggested that it was connected to the selection of Violet Thorn's 100 children. The entire academic schedule had supposedly been accelerated to identify the truly talented students. The rumor seemed credible because one student had a friend at another school who had complained about the same change. The teacher explained that the session would serve as a practical combat lesson for the third-year students and the first combat exercise for the first-year combat class. Once the freshmen completed their contracts, they would be paired with third-year students according to randomly drawn numbers. They would then fight practice battles to familiarize themselves with their spiritual beast's abilities. The student beside Xiaosu admitted that she was nervous and asked whether Xiaosu truly intended to contract a gray beetle. Xiaosu confirmed that she did, holding the beetle in her hand. The first battle began, and a blind-tusk armored pig started chasing a small spiritual creature across the field. The first-year student's gliding squirrel fled the battlefield, giving the third-year student the victory. One of the freshmen complained that the arrangement was unfair. They had only just formed their contracts, yet they were already being forced to fight experienced upperclassmen. The battles were completely one-sided. Xiaosu was next, and since she was the strongest student in the class, everyone hoped she would defend their honor. The teacher announced the 9th match and asked both participants whether they were ready. The third-year student answered that he was. The freshman immediately recognized him as Feng Lixing, whose family had a relative working in the Creator Guild. Lixing was competing for a place among Violet Thorn's 100 children and needed only a few more practical combat victories. Xiaosu was also highly regarded, but her spiritual creature presented an obvious problem. Secretly, Lixing considered himself fortunate. He had received news from the Creator Guild the previous night, and now he had been given the perfect stepping stones to improve his victory record. To him, it felt as though the heavens themselves were supporting him. Becoming one of Violet Thorn's 100 children, and even earning the chance to become the Moon Empress's disciple, suddenly seemed far more attainable. His meteoric rise was within reach. He had also heard that a freshman named Xiaosu planned to contract a gray beetle. If that was true, she would have no chance of defeating him. Xiaosu remained determined. Even if all she had was a gray beetle, she would not surrender. She was about to announce that she was ready when someone called out to her. It was her teacher, dragging a spiritual creature behind her. This was the best she had been able to obtain, an elite-grade yellow-spotted dog. She refused to let Xiaosu waste her talent on a gray beetle. Suddenly, someone shouted for them to wait, and a massive bird swept across the sky. Yuan leaped down and landed beside them. He thanked the teacher for her kindness and announced that he had brought Xiaosu's spiritual creature. Xiaosu was astonished to see her brother. Yuan was relieved that he had arrived in time. He encouraged her to trust him and form a contract with the creature he had brought. The teacher, however, remained doubtful. She asked whether the creature could truly be trusted, adding that the yellow-spotted dog was still available, even though it was not particularly obedient. Lixing burst out laughing. He declared that it made no difference which spiritual creature Xiaosu chose, whether it was a gray beetle, a yellow-spotted dog, or anything else. He was completely confident that none of them could defeat his own spiritual creature. It was a Strength King beetle, a copper rank, level 1 insect from the Scarabaeidae dynasty lineage. His primary abilities were Giant Horn Charge and Valiant Assault. It also possessed an exclusive trait called Insect Observation, which allowed it to see through the camouflage of spiritual creatures below copper rank. The teacher grew nervous at the sight of the enormous Strength King beetle. She knew that even the yellow-spotted dog would be unable to withstand a single blow from it. Xiaosu asked her brother whether the object he had brought was a copper rank spiritual creature contract box. She could not understand how their family had obtained so much money. One possibility that crossed her mind was that Yuan had sold the shop. Yuan told her not to overthink it and to focus on the challenge before her. Xiaosu promised that she would be fine and would not allow their efforts to go to waste. She released the spiritual creature, and the contract was successfully formed. The students began asking what kind of creature it was, since none of them had ever seen anything like it. Its hide looked as solid as steel. Lixing admitted that her entrance had been impressive, but he still held the advantage in combat experience. He mocked the siblings for apparently bankrupting themselves just to acquire a giant iron ox that was about to lose. Xiaosu replied that they would not know the outcome until the battle was over. She commanded the iron-horned rhinoceros to activate Rock Horn. The teacher became excited when she realized that the iron-horned rhinoceros had reached copper rank. Its overall development was exceptionally complete, making it one of the finest defensive spiritual creatures at that rank. Its horn alone was worth approximately 700,000 Federation coins. Yuan reminded her not to judge the creature solely by its monetary value. She explained that assessing value was simply a professional habit of a spiritual creature analyst. The rhinoceros's horn collided with the beetle's. Lixing called Xiaosu naive for launching such a reckless attack. He then prepared to demonstrate the true power of a strength assault spiritual creature and ordered the beetle to use giant horn charge. Xiaosu had the iron-horned rhinoceros brace itself against the ground only slightly, yet it was still nearly pushed away. Lixing realized that Xiaosu was genuinely talented since she was already capable of using spiritual energy to support her spiritual beast. The teacher was relieved that the creature had not been knocked out of the arena immediately after forming its first contract. Still, she remarked that Xiaosu had attacked recklessly after only the slightest provocation, revealing her lack of combat experience. Yuan knew that was not the case. If Xiaosu had familiarized herself with the iron-horned rhinoceros's abilities the moment their contract was formed, then launching the first attack had been a deliberate tactic to probe her opponent. The students were confused by the beetle's behavior as it raced around the enormous iron ox. Hearing their comments, Lixing silently called them idiots. There was only one reason a strength assault creature would begin moving like that. It was searching for the perfect opportunity to deliver a fatal blow. He muttered that the little girl had no idea what she was about to face. The beetle launched a full-force charge. Xiaosu worried about the iron-horned rhinoceros, but the entire area had become shrouded in smoke, preventing her from seeing clearly. The impact was so powerful that everyone expected the massive iron ox to collapse. Its opponent was a strength assault spiritual creature famous throughout the academy for defeating enemies with a single strike. Even the teacher reached the same conclusion. No matter how much spiritual energy Xiaosu channeled into the rhinoceros to stabilize it, the effort seemed useless. Even if it survived the initial impact, the relentless attacks that followed would eventually wear it down. Several students complained that pairing a third-year student against a first-year student in a practical battle was simply unfair. Yuan, however, saw no problem. He had specifically chosen an ability designed for exactly this kind of situation. Xiaosu commanded the iron-horned rhinoceros to activate Pain Siphon. The students stared in confusion as the spiritual energy surrounding the rhinoceros changed and its injuries began healing. They wondered aloud whether this was one of its abilities. When the teacher heard the name Pain Siphon, she became excited. The ability allowed the rhinoceros to absorb part of the damage it received and convert it into vitality. It was an exceptionally rare, exclusive trait. Yuan felt proud of Xiaosu. Despite this being her first practical battle and her first time controlling an iron-horned rhinoceros, she was still able to manage the situation and seize the right opportunity. Lixing shouted that even with iron skin, the creature was nothing more than a slightly tougher punching bag. He ordered the Strength King beetle to continue attacking. The students were astonished to see that the iron-horned rhinoceros's life force had not diminished in the slightest despite enduring so many blows. It simply continued absorbing every attack. The teacher asked Yuan whether the iron-horned rhinoceros he had selected possessed any counterattack abilities. She could not accept that Xiaosu's creature was merely taking hits without fighting back. Yuan told her to remain calm and reminded her that she herself had said Xiaosu possessed an affinity for defensive spiritual creatures. He trusted that Xiaosu had a plan of her own. Lixing ordered the Strength King beetle to finish the battle with a single strike. He wanted it to unleash giant horn charge at full power. The Strength King beetle immediately followed his command. Xiaosu activated Rock Horn. Everyone stared in disbelief when the iron-horned rhinoceros began using the battlefield itself. Some even questioned whether such a move was allowed. Yuan, meanwhile, was immensely proud that Xiaosu had adapted to the terrain. It was an excellent decision. Lixing grew furious, convinced that she was resorting to cheap tricks. He commanded the Strength King beetle to crush everything in its path. Debris flew in every direction as the beetle continued charging forward. Xiaosu ordered the iron-horned rhinoceros to keep using Rock Horn. Their horns collided. The students watched in astonishment as the massive iron ox withstood the impact. They could hardly believe that the two creatures were evenly matched, although the Strength King beetle still appeared to hold the advantage. The teacher began explaining that giant horn charge was a highly self-destructive attack that disregarded the beetle's own injuries. Every time it struck the iron-horned rhinoceros's defenses, the beetle also suffered damage. Furthermore, this Strength King beetle had likely been raised according to Lixing's personal preferences, focusing entirely on maximum offensive power and absolute precision. As a result, he had never considered the possibility that its attack might be blocked by another spiritual creature of the same rank. Yuan understood that this extreme offensive training method was designed to establish dominance in duels and end battles quickly. However, situations could still arise in which Lixing failed to defeat his opponent immediately. At that moment, everyone saw the Strength King beetle beetle lose its footing. Some assumed that Xiaosu had merely been fortunate, but the teacher explained that luck had nothing to do with it. During a prolonged contest of strength, the bodily balance of an insect-type spiritual creature simply could not compare with that of an iron-horned rhinoceros. Moreover, the contractor's mental state also affected the condition of the spiritual creature. These were all fundamental principles from their textbooks that every student should already understand. Lixing became increasingly enraged. A mere first-year student had not only contracted a copper-rank spiritual creature but was now using a defensive creature to block the attacks of a Strength Assault type. It felt as though fate itself were mocking him. He ordered the Strength King Beetle to create some distance and attack the girl on the opposite side directly. The Strength King Beetle leaped backward before rolling straight toward Xiaosu. The teacher protested that the move violated the rules, while Yuan hoped that Xiaosu would manage to evade it. Xiaosu ordered the iron-horned rhinoceros to continue driving Rockhorn into the ground. The terrain had been transformed into a series of small cliffs, and the beetle crashed into one of them before tumbling to the edge of the arena. With that, the outcome of the battle was decided. Shock spread across Lixing's face as Xiaosu was declared the winner. The first-year students erupted in celebration, thrilled to have finally won a match. Xiaosu's teacher finally understood that the repeated use of Rockhorn had been intended to accumulate enough stone across the battlefield for the final impact to overturn the Strength King Beetle. The student in whom everyone had placed such high expectations had not disappointed them. The teacher slapped Yuan on the back and praised him for obtaining such an exceptional creature. Yuan asked her to calm down, since the blow had been far too strong. Xiaosu ran over and embraced her brother. Yuan congratulated her. Pouting, she asked where he had obtained so much money and whether he had sold the shop. She also worried about what would happen to his illness if they ran out of money, clearly concerned for his health. Yuan assured her that he had not sold the shop. He explained that he had completely recovered and that business was going extremely well. The teacher did not want to interrupt them, but time was limited, so she spoke directly. She told Yuan that, given Xiaosu's talent, the academy intended to recommend her for direct participation in the preliminary stage of Violet Thorn's 100 Children selection. Violet Thorn's 100 Children was the most basic level among the regional selections. The ultimate goal was to qualify for the Radiant Federation's 100 Children selection, the nation's true top-level competition. Even though Xiaosu was only a first-year high school student, her talent was already sufficient to earn her a place in the preliminaries. The academy's educational resources would also be fully directed toward her, allowing her to grow at an extraordinary pace. Yuan thanked the teacher for taking care of Xiaosu and promised that from that moment onward, he would devote all his efforts to securing the spiritual creatures and resources she needed. The teacher replied that nurturing a promising young talent was also part of her duty. She told Xiaosu that if she had no classes that afternoon, she could show her brother around the academy. Yuan expressed concern about the yellow-spotted dog, but the teacher said she could raise it herself. After touring the academy and buying some snacks, Yuan repeated that he could now sense spiritual qi. He asked what further proof Xiaosu needed. She replied that she wanted to see it with her own eyes before she could stop worrying. She knew the iron-horned rhinoceros must have cost an enormous amount. Yuan showed her his bank balance, and her eyes widened at the number of zeros. He explained that after recovering his ability to sense spiritual qi, he had discovered that he possessed some talent as a creator. He had therefore begun working in that field and earned money from it. Yuan encouraged Xiaosu to focus entirely on her studies, participate in the selections, and achieve a strong ranking. She would no longer need to work part-time to support the family. He also revealed that he intended to take the creator certification examination. Xiaosu was delighted for him. Yuan invited her to celebrate by eating something delicious. She said she wanted hot pot, and he was happy with anything. Meanwhile, the teacher asked the yellow-spotted dog whether it liked meat buns. Honestly, the true hero of this story was that teacher. One could only wish that every teacher were like her. In any case, Yuan used ostrich logistics once again to return home. During the journey, he reflected that he would also need to work harder now that Xiaosu's education was on the right track, since the examinations would not be easy. Later, he would need to purchase introductory books for spiritual creature researchers and spiritual material analysts. There were far too many for him to study alone, so he considered asking Smarty for help. Although Xiaosu had won the practical battle by taking advantage of the damage reflection mechanism within her creature's abilities, the true foundation of her victory had been her stable and abundant spiritual qi. By comparison, Yuan's own spiritual qi reserves were still insufficient for him to be considered a genuine professional. Even if he wanted to evolve Mobius, its exclusive trait Spirit Lock imposed extremely strict conditions. He would have to begin with a normal grade level 1 creature. Yuan was suddenly startled when the flight accelerated dramatically. The conductor was demonstrating the black-winged falcon's maximum speed in hopes of earning a positive review. too, since he had nearly caused Yuan to arrive late at his previous destination. Yuan mentioned that he still had several items to purchase, and the conductor suggested ordering them through Starrett and using ostrich logistics for same-day delivery. By the time they reached Yuan's home, the bird was completely exhausted. Yuan asked whether it was all right, but the conductor assured him that there was no cause for concern. Since the journey had been completed and everything delivered as requested, he reminded Yuan to leave a favorable review. Yuan promised that he would and thanked him for his hard work. Dozens of boxes were already waiting inside the house, all from his online purchases. Yuan planned to establish an online store so that he would no longer need to visit the spiritual creature market, which would be considerably safer. He announced that he had returned. Smarty and Een came to welcome him. Smarty had missed Yuan, but restrained himself after remembering that he was supposed to be angry. Een told him not to stay upset since she had already taken him flying. Yuan promised to bring him along next time. Smarty remained so stubborn that not even braised pork could improve his mood. Yuan privately found his behavior childish, but fortunately he had come prepared. He announced that he had brought an apology gift and opened a can of cat food. Smarty was unable to resist its delicious aroma, causing his anger to disappear much sooner than expected. Yuan promised to buy it for him every day if he liked it. Een excitedly asked whether he had brought anything for her as well. Yuan revealed an elite-grade green vine purchased exclusively for her. From that day onward, the entire pot would serve as her personal food supply. Een was delighted, since Yuan had never allowed her to eat one before. Smarty noticed Yuan carrying the boxes and asked whether he intended to eat. Yuan told them to begin without him, as he still needed to arrange the merchandise. By the time he finished, the shop was filled with pots. Even Smarty commented that there were far too many, and Yuan admitted that he had not expected such a large quantity either. Een noticed an unfamiliar plant among them and went over to inspect it. A card beside it explained that purchasing 100 pots of green vines entitled the buyer to receive a lily of the same grade free of charge. Yuan had not expected such a promotion. He then remembered that healing dash, support dash, and plant-type spiritual creatures were the most compatible with him. His eyes lit up when he realized that the gift was exactly what he needed, a normal-grade healing spiritual plant with a recovery ability. He asked Smarty and Een to remain downstairs and take good care of the green vines. Yuan went upstairs and began working. He activated Spirit Lock, but after going so long without rest, his mental power was far from its best. Even so, now that he had started, there was no turning back. In the end, he completed the process successfully. To his satisfaction, he discovered that, unlike before, it had consumed almost none of his mental power. As long as he continued supplying spiritual chi, he could trigger a chain of evolutions. 1 hour later, the Lara Lily had reached elite grade, level 1, with legendary quality. Its ability was healing, which restored external injuries. Yuan sighed in relief when the evolution was finally complete. He then examined Mobius. Its species remained unknown, but it had evolved to elite grade, level 1, with legendary quality. Its abilities, however, remained unchanged. Without warning, Mobius began shining intensely, taking Yuan by surprise. Yuan was transported into Mobius's spirit lock space, where he immediately noticed that the area had grown larger since his previous visit. Suddenly, someone asked whether Yuan could hear them. Yuan replied that he could hear perfectly and greeted Mobius, remarking that it had been a long time since they last met. This led into a brief lesson inspired by something Xiaosu had once told him. When a spiritual chi professional formed a contract with a spiritual creature, the process consumed mental power. Most people could contract only 2 or 3 spiritual creatures throughout their lives, while the highest known limit was 5. Spirit Lock was Mobius's exclusive trait. It could reproduce the effects of a contract without requiring its contractor to spend any additional mental power. Instead, Mobius bore the cost itself. The number of spiritual creatures Yuan could contract depended on how many times Mobius evolved. The price, however, had been severe. During the first 10 years after Yuan contracted Mobius, his ability to sense spiritual chi had been reduced to nothing, while his mental power remained abnormally weakened. Honestly, considering his current circumstances, that no longer seemed like such a terrible price. Returning to the present, Yuan asked Mobius to confirm whether it could truly speak now. Mobius replied that reaching elite grade had been enough to grant it that ability. Its design was certainly unique. Yuan then asked whether the space around them was one of Mobius's exclusive abilities. Mobius confirmed that it was, explaining that Yuan, as its contractor, could freely modify the space and store spiritual creatures inside it. Yuan asked about the lake, since he could not sense any spiritual chi within it. Mobius explained that there truly was no spiritual chi there because it contained nothing more than ordinary water. Yuan remained confused until Mobius explained that water attracted wealth. Yuan remarked that Mobius certainly had a personality of its own. Yuan tossed something into the water and, just as he had expected. Even the low-quality energy stones commonly used in flower pots continued releasing spiritual qi. In the outside world, some spiritual qi inevitably dispersed, meaning its utilization efficiency could never reach 100%. The spirit lock space, however, prevented any energy from escaping. If higher-quality energy stones were placed inside, the concentration of spiritual qi would become extraordinarily dense over time. Yuan grew excited when he realized that raising spiritual creatures inside this space would be many times more efficient. Mobius confirmed his conclusion and added that as it continued evolving, the amount of time the space could be used would also increase. Yuan knew that maintaining all of this would require an enormous supply of Federation coins. Even the lowest quality energy stones were expensive, let alone superior ones. Earning money had become an urgent priority. Mobius's body began fading away, causing Yuan to ask anxiously what was happening. Mobius assured him that nothing serious was wrong. It could maintain such clear communication for only half an hour each day, and that time had already expired. As Yuan's first contracted spiritual creature, Mobius apologized for impairing his mental power and ability to sense spiritual qi for 10 years. Yuan told Mobius that there was no need to apologize, since those 10 years had also allowed him to understand many things. More importantly, he now had hope again, and the road ahead was still long. The true challenge had only just begun. At that moment, however, exhaustion overwhelmed him, and Yuan fell into a deep sleep. The following day, he resumed using his power on the green vines while Smarty browsed the internet. Yuan continued working tirelessly for several days. By the time he finished, it was already late at night. In and Smarty were both sleeping soundly. Yuan entered another room and used healing on the two web-shooting spiders. Their lives had now been saved as well, another result of his efforts through repeated evolutions. 7 days later, Brother Yang arrived outside Yuan's shop. Before entering, he offered a prayer, hoping that this time he would finally receive an opportunity to change his life. He also admitted that producing 100 pots of green vines in such a short period was extraordinarily difficult. He had been incredibly fortunate to discover a spiritual creature shop operated by a creator. Brother Yang opened the door. Yuan was already waiting for him. There was no doubt that this was because Yuan had accepted the agreement immediately, and Brother Yang was in urgent need of the order, so Yuan led him inside. Yang had already prepared himself for the possibility that only 30 pots would be ready, just enough to keep hope alive for the breeding base he had recently rented. He looked to the right and saw rows of pots. He turned to the left and found even more. Pots filled the entire room. Yuan informed him that everything was ready. Yang had originally requested 76 pots, so he could simply choose whichever ones he wanted from the 100 available. Yang stared in disbelief before admitting that Yuan had practically saved half his life. Yuan told him there was no need for flattery. Brother Yang asked him to name his price and promised not to bargain over a single coin. Yuan replied that the original price would be fine. Deeply moved to have met someone so honorable, Yang declared that Yuan would be his sworn brother. He confirmed that he would purchase everything at the previously agreed price. Before leaving, Yang said he would get his breeding base operational as soon as possible and insisted that Yuan visit once it was ready. If he obtained anything valuable, he would reserve it for Yuan first. Seeing how delighted Brother Yang was, Yuan realized that being a creator was truly an excellent profession. With the room now empty, it was time to replenish the stock. He asked Smarty whether he had learned how to register the shop on Starrett, as Yuan had requested several days earlier. Smarty suddenly cried out that something terrible had happened, prompting Yuan to rush over. In tears, Smarty complained that he had gained weight and could no longer eat energy biscuits. Yuan reassured him that his fur had simply become fluffier. After examining his attributes, Yuan discovered that Smarty had evolved to elite grade and asked whether he felt any more intelligent. Smarty said that he did, but believed it was mainly due to his extraordinary natural talent. Previously, he could memorize information equivalent to only 1 energy biscuit. Now, he could remember the equivalent of 5. Yuan also noticed that Smarty's favorite food had changed from braised pork to energy biscuits. Yuan said that he would need Smarty's help with many things, and Smarty confidently assured him that he could count on him. Yuan then went looking for In. At that exact moment, she also cried out that something terrible had happened. The scene repeated itself, and Yuan already knew what was coming next. In appeared looking worried, convinced that she had shrunk and asking whether she was sick. Smarty already knew the answer. She had just evolved. He asked Yuan whether he was correct. Yuan examined her attributes and confirmed that she had reached elite grade, level 2. Her abilities were Sound Thorn, which fired a spike formed from sound at a designated target, and Turbulence, which generated a rapid, continuous, and irregular airflow through the beating of her wings. In other words, her abilities were primarily combat-oriented. Yuan asked why neither ability had anything to do with singing. Smarty admitted that they had secretly immediately tested the abilities themselves. He showed Yuan a wooden board. Yuan asked whether the marks had been left by Sound Thorn, and In confirmed that they had. She explained that the two of them had been playing on their own while Yuan was away. Smarty suggested testing the ability again to see whether its power had increased. He held up the board, but In warned him that standing so close to the target was dangerous. Yuan began the Sound Thorn test. Smarty insisted that everything would be fine because Yin's aim was highly accurate. The instant In attacked, Smarty's eyes widened and his jaw dropped. He was now fully convinced that the ability was far too dangerous. Yuan stroked his head to comfort him before they moved on to testing turbulence. In activated the ability, shattering the board into pieces. Yuan realized that her power could no longer be compared to what she had possessed at normal grade. He concluded that In was indeed a combat-class spiritual creature. The ordered goods were delivered to Yuan's home, and he signed the necessary documents. Meanwhile, Smarty proposed testing Yin's abilities again, claiming that she could probably pierce an iron plate now. Yuan refused, pointing out that they had already conducted several tests and In was tired. He preferred to let her rest properly. He also reminded Smarty that 100 Questions Beast served a different purpose and that his own usefulness would soon become apparent. Smarty eagerly urged him to reveal what he meant. Yuan then instructed him to feed the two web-shooting spiders. Smarty immediately became nervous, afraid that they might bite him. Yuan observed that fear of arachnids was instinctive among most spiritual creatures. He had only been teasing Smarty and soon helped him with the task. Afterward, he asked Smarty to record the information on every spiritual creature in the shop. From that moment onward, managing the records would be Smarty's responsibility. Smarty noticed that the two web-shooting spiders were glowing in different colors. The one on the left emitted green light, while the one on the right glowed purple. Yuan recognized this as a sign that they were about to evolve. The spiders released streams of silk and enclosed themselves inside cocoons. Smarty was amazed that Yuan had caused both of them to evolve simultaneously. Yuan explained that the same thing had happened with the iron-horned rhinoceros. The spiders had already entered a pre-evolution state, but an accident had left them critically injured. Once their vitality had been fully restored, their evolutions began naturally. 2 hours later, both spiders emerged from their cocoons. One had followed the path of prehistoric regression. Its exclusive trait was ferocious venom, which infused its entire body, including its webs, with an extremely potent toxin. The other had undergone a spiritual mutation. Its exclusive trait was adhesive web, which greatly increased the stickiness of its silk and significantly strengthened its control capabilities. Smarty was amazed that the two spiders had evolved along completely different paths. Yuan admitted that he had not expected it either. It seemed Brother Yang had given them an exceptionally strong foundation. Smarty asked whether they intended to sell them. He had already registered the shop on Starrett, so Yuan decided to take a look. Yuan asked why they still needed to enter a store name. Smarty explained that he had deliberately left that part unfinished so Yuan could participate as well. Yuan began typing and chose the name No Loss Spiritual Creature Shop. For his username, he selected Old Forest of the Deep Mountains. Smarty remarked that after all the effort he had put into registering the shop, Yuan had chosen an incredibly old-fashioned name. Yuan then confirmed whether the star receiver had been installed. They would still need to test the Starrett card afterward, but Smarty informed him that everything was nearly ready. Yuan scanned a card, and everyone was impressed by the reading. He passed the card over the flower pots before entering the room where the spiders were kept. Smarty asked whether the spiders also needed to be scanned. Yuan replied that they were the highest priority. He then jokingly scanned Smarty as though launching an attack. After they fooled around for a moment, the surroundings suddenly changed. Smarty asked where they were. Yuan explained that this was the shop's display area within Starrett. The complicated registration process had not been for an ordinary online store. Smarty was astonished by the size of the place. It was twice as large as their home. Although StarNet was a world composed entirely of data, that data genuinely existed in reality and was simply presented through virtual images. Smarty asked why none of the decorations from their house appeared there. Yuan explained that decorating a space within StarNet required additional payment. It was an extremely practical reason. After learning how to navigate the menu bar, Yuan and Smarty went for a walk through the star community. Yuan warned Smarty not to run off. Smarty's eyes immediately lit up when he spotted a pig large enough to provide at least 80 servings of braised pork. He then pointed out a store to Yuan. It was a furniture and decoration shop, so Yuan decided to enter and see whether anything there could be used to furnish their store. An intelligent robot approached and asked what kind of furniture they needed. Smarty stared at it in amazement. Yuan said that he wanted 2 flower stands and a counter measuring 1.5 meters in height. The robot guided them toward the items, but both of them turned pale, their jaws nearly dropping when they saw the prices. Yuan decided decided not to buy anything for the time being. Even though he had the money, he did not believe this was the right way to spend it. Smarty thought that if he put in 120% effort, making everything by hand might not be impossible. Yuan then asked the intelligent robot about the cheapest chairs available. At the very least, they needed a few seats to keep customers comfortable when they visited. However, each chair cost 15,000 Federation coins. Smarty tried bargaining, insisting that he would pay no more than 1,000. The intelligent robot simply informed him that such a decision was beyond its authority. Smarty was disappointed that his bargaining had failed. Yuan comforted him, explaining that it was not his fault. The other party was a robot. Afterward, they visited a bookstore. When Smarty asked why, Yuan reminded him that he intended to take the creator examination. Naturally, that meant he needed textbooks. Yuan was overwhelmed by the sheer number of books inside, so he entrusted the selection to Smarty. Smarty began reciting titles to the intelligent robot. There were 327 books in total, with a catalog included as a complimentary gift. The robot asked whether they wanted everything packaged. Yuan instructed it to convert the entire collection into a knowledge chip and deliver it to the address he provided. The robot then asked him to sign a confidentiality agreement confirming that the purchased books would not be used by anyone outside his family. Otherwise, the Creator Association would hold him responsible for leaking restricted information. With their business complete, it was time to return. Yuan remarked that the intelligent robot was remarkably useful and even considered purchasing one to manage the shop. When they reappeared inside the store, someone was startled. A girl realized that Yuan had used the shop's internal teleportation system and asked whether he was the owner. She complained that the store did not even have an intelligent robot, leaving her to wait there without knowing when he would return. Yuan apologized and explained that the store had only just opened, so they had not yet had time to install one. Privately, he felt annoyed that a girl around Xiaosu's age could behave so arrogantly. She called him uncle and asked how much the 2 spiders cost. Yuan was stunned to be addressed as an uncle. The customer demanded that he introduce the spiders and state their prices. She also warned him not to charge too much, since the shop was called No Loss Spiritual Creature Shop. Smarty rolled across the floor laughing after hearing her call Yuan uncle. Yuan explained that the smaller spider with long, slender legs was, more precisely, a web-shooting spider that had awakened the exclusive trait adhesive web. After realizing that it was not poisonous, the girl turned her attention to the larger one. Yuan introduced it as a greenish web-shooting spider whose exclusive trait was ferocious venom. The girl was so frightened that she lost her balance and fell to the floor. Her B-shaped hat slipped off, revealing that she was bald. Upon seeing her head, Yuan instinctively compared it to a braised egg. However, as a professional, he could not mock her. He restrained himself and maintained a professional expression, but Smarty began drooling and blurted out, "Braised egg." Yuan was horrified. The girl touched her head and realized that her B-hat had fallen off. Her face turned red as she hurriedly explained that the hair loss was merely a side effect of treatment after being bitten by a thorned phantom spider, and that her hair would grow back within a few months. She made a point of emphasizing that she was not a braised egg. The thorned phantom spider seemed to have heard that comparison before. Yuan then asked whether she was interested in spider-type spiritual creatures, leaving her speechless. When he pressed her for an answer, she became irritated and clarified that she did not like spider-type spiritual creatures at all. Yuan asked why she was searching for one, then, and how she had ended up encountering something as dangerous as a thorned phantom spider. She admitted that her affinity was limited to spider-type spiritual creatures. Hearing this, Yuan silently acknowledged that some affinities simply did not suit the person who possessed them. The person who hated spider-type creatures most had somehow become someone capable of contracting only creatures of that kind. On the other hand, arachnids formed an extremely broad category of spiritual creatures, which meant she had many potential development paths available. Furthermore, she had been successfully treated after encountering the thorned phantom spider, proving that she had money. Personally, Yuan would first have advised her to find a hole and bury herself in it. She said that the creature she wanted was not there and prepared to leave, but Yuan stopped her. He explained that if she needed a combat creature, control and poison were both popular development paths, and each spider possessed one of those exclusive traits. She countered that the exclusive traits of those 2 web-shooting spiders were far too weak. She wanted only a spider-type spiritual creature with powerful control abilities. Yuan was left speechless by her claim that the spiders were weak. She clarified that their individual strength was irrelevant. She simply wanted to try her luck obtaining a web-shooting spider with the exclusive trait transparent web, even if that meant placing a custom order and purchasing several elite-grade, epic-quality specimens. Yuan realized that the girl was both wealthy and stubborn. Transparent web was an exceptionally rare, exclusive trait. Even with a custom order, poor luck could leave her empty-handed after 10 or 20 web-shooting spiders. Yuan, however, believed he might be able to obtain one. He told her that he could try. When he asked how many she wanted, she took offense and demanded to know whether he thought she was naive, adorable, and easy to deceive. She added that although he was somewhat handsome, she would not believe him so easily. Yuan began growing irritated, but became distracted after realizing that she had called him handsome. He decided that he had to secure this order, not because she knew how to flatter him, but because he could not bear to watch a sick little girl keep running into dead ends. Yuan was simply too kind. He told her to do as she pleased, adding that perhaps after visiting another 10 shops, she might finally find the web-shooting spider she wanted. She stopped him from leaving. Yuan asked what she wanted, since she clearly did not trust him. She asked whether he genuinely had a way to obtain it. Yuan replied that if she could not trust his word, then there was nothing more he could do. She suggested adding each other as friends on Starnet so that he could contact her if he succeeded in customizing the spider. Yuan's strategy of retreating to gain the advantage had worked. He had plenty of experience dealing with customers like her, but he rejected the suggestion and told her to return when she genuinely intended to purchase something. She put on an adorable expression and asked him not to be angry. She explained that the shop's complete lack of decoration had made her fear she was being deceived. She continued insisting that they add each other as friends and promised that if he successfully customized the spider, she would not argue over the price. Yuan eventually agreed, and they tapped their cards together. She found his username amusing. He read hers, Cloudstream, and remarked that sand eagles lived there. She called him an idiot for implying that she was a sand sculpture. Their exchange of insults continued until Yuan gained the upper hand by reminding her that he was an important shop owner who would be helping her customize a web-shooting spider. She shouted at him to stop acting like that and emphasized that she was an important customer who would be paying him. She immediately transferred 10 radiant coins and told him that she would be waiting for good news. Yuan could hardly believe how deep her pockets were. Each customized web-shooting spider cost 2 radiant coins, yet she had paid the full price for 5 without hesitation. Smarty's eyes lit up at the sight of so much money. He assumed that they would never face financial trouble again and mentioned that Yuan had always wanted the latest records and a sound system. Yuan admitted that things would not be so simple. The payment was merely a deposit and would not enter their account until every condition of the order had been fulfilled. Until then, the funds would remain under Starrett's official custody. Fortunately, Brother Yang had sent the final payment earlier, so they still had enough money available. Yuan then checked the cost of the web-shooting spiders. To their surprise, 5 elite-grade specimens cost only 1 radiant coin. Smarty asked why the price had suddenly fallen by almost a third. Brother Yang's payment of 3.3 radiant coins had not even been spent yet. Yuan considered the matter and realized that if he followed the normal cultivation process, he could not even estimate how much money he would need to spend on spiritual materials. He now understood why the braised egg girl had handed over 10 radiant coins so decisively. After seeing their financial situation, Smarty became discouraged. He began wondering whether a small shop on Starrett could ever recover its initial investment. Yuan said that now that they had an intelligent robot managing the store, they did not need to worry as much. Even so, they would still have to spend carefully, since he had no idea how much more expanding the shop would cost. Smarty remained doubtful. No customers had appeared before they left, and the old robot Yuan had brought back seemed rather stupid. Yuan encouraged him to look on the bright side. As long as they completed the braised egg girl's order properly, they would eventually receive a substantial amount of money. That did nothing to improve Smarty's mood. Defeated, he went upstairs to play with Een. Yuan assured him that he would recover the money very quickly. He then went to speak with Mobius and entered its internal space, asking whether it was nearby because he wanted to discuss the spiritual creature for the next stage of Spirit Lock. Mobius said that it disagreed with his approach. It warned Yuan to spend money sparingly, since their resources were limited and had to be strictly controlled. Yuan acknowledged that money was important, but argued that strengthening himself would also allow him to earn more money at a faster rate. He explained that he had already considered which spiritual creature to use for the next stage of Spirit Lock, though he still wanted Mobius's opinion. His intended choice was the Spirit Siphon Goldfish. Yuan had not expected Mobius to respond so calmly. Mobius had no objection to the Spirit Siphon Goldfish. However, it warned Yuan that the spiritual chi required for Mobius to advance in level was more than 10 times greater than what other spiritual creatures of the same grade needed. Yuan accepted this without hesitation. Although he was not entirely certain, he could vaguely sense that whenever his mental power weakened, Mobius compressed its own strength to protect him. Because of that, Yuan felt responsible for finding a way to help Mobius recover as quickly as possible. Mobius entrusted that task to him. With the matter settled, Yuan activated Starnet's search function. A single search immediately left him stunned. Rows of storefronts appeared around him, forming what looked like an entire street devoted exclusively to Spirit Siphon siphon goldfish. Unfortunately, most of them sold only normal-grade specimens. What Yuan truly wanted was an elite-grade option, so he checked whether the results could be filtered to display only higher-grade stores. After adjusting several settings, an enormous shop appeared. Its entrance lay roughly 800 meters farther inside. The interior space had clearly been compressed, most likely to improve the presentation. Every product was arranged flawlessly and accompanied by detailed descriptions displayed through specialized interfaces. The overall layout was impressive enough to study. A woman approached and asked what he needed. She offered to assist him personally, explaining that the shop's employees were currently taking a break. Yuan was pleasantly surprised to meet a real person rather than an intelligent robot. The woman introduced herself as the shop's owner, Joe Jackson. Yuan told her that he wanted to purchase a spirit siphon goldfish. She nodded and led him to the appropriate section. She showed him a tank containing normal-grade specimens. Regardless of bloodline, each one cost half a radiant coin. A red goldfish more than twice the size of the others was elite grade and priced at 5 radiant coins. Just as the rumors claimed, spirit siphon goldfish restored spiritual chi remarkably quickly. Merely standing near one caused the surrounding spiritual chi to become noticeably denser. However, the price made Yuan hesitate. Even a normal-grade goldfish cost more than an elite-grade web-shooting spider. His original plan of purchasing an elite-grade specimen immediately was clearly unrealistic. Noticing his hesitation, Joe Jackson explained that the bloodlines on display were not considered particularly exceptional. Superior bloodlines would cost at least 7 radiant coins. Normal-grade specimens, however, were priced the same regardless of bloodline. After all, evolving this species was notoriously difficult, so very few creators were willing to accept such commissions. Yuan thanked her for the advice and addressed her as boss, but she laughed and told him to call her sister Qin instead. She then asked whether he intended to choose one based solely on appearance. In terms of cultivation potential, Yuan knew that he needed a dragon eye variety. If it underwent a mutation and awakened a draconic bloodline, it would be like a carp leaping through the dragon gate. Even so, he wondered whether he could truly be fortunate enough to repeat what had happened when the iron-horned rhinoceros ox evolved. He quickly dismissed the thought and refocused. His true objective was to test whether the spirit lock space could accelerate the goldfish's growth. If it worked, his shop would have a guaranteed flagship product. Yuan pointed out his choice. Sister Qin recorded it and asked whether he needed anything else. Yuan remembered that the lake inside the spirit lock space still had to be tested for its capacity to hold spiritual chi, which prompted him to purchase additional energy ore. She offered a bulk discount, reducing the price to 500 Federation coins per crate. Yuan decided to purchase 2,000 crates, leaving her frozen in surprise. He then asked whether he could pay by scanning his StarNet card directly. She confirmed that he could and explained that Ostrich Logistics would deliver everything to his registered address. The scale of the purchase led her to assume that Yuan was a major customer. She then mentioned that if he was concerned about feeding the spirit siphon goldfish, she recommended butterfly shells. Although relatively expensive, they were renowned for their remarkable ability to promote the growth of spiritual creatures. Yuan thanked her for being so considerate. He felt a sharp pain in his heart as his final radiant coin disappeared, but the supply should be enough to feed the goldfish for 3 to 5 months. Sister Qin suggested that they add each other as friends on StarNet. That way, whenever Yuan needed something in the future, he could contact her directly. As long as he could afford the price, she would be able to obtain it for him. Yuan replied that it would be an honor. He was genuinely pleased. Rare materials were always in short supply, and being able to order them directly would save him considerable trouble. He was about to speak when she anticipated his request, guessing that he would need more energy or butterfly shells and several additional spirit siphon goldfish. Yuan confirmed her guess, adding that low-grade energy ore would be sufficient. Higher grade ore contained pure spiritual chi, while inferior ore was generally suitable only for nurturing normal or elite-grade spiritual creatures. The scale of Yuan's purchases made Sister Qin curious about just how large his spiritual creature breeding base might be. Deep down, she believed that perseverance was always rewarded. If she could secure Yuan as a long-term customer, her shop would gain a steady stream of orders. To strengthen her competitive advantage, she offered him services reserved for long-term clients. Yuan immediately became interested. She explained that the shop could purchase some of the spiritual creatures produced by regular customers while also supplying them with critically injured creatures. These were guaranteed to be fresh and of high quality as spiritual materials. Yuan's eyes lit up and he asked when the next shipment would arrive. Sister Qin replied that it would come in 3 weeks and promised to notify him through StarNet if anything changed. By then, Yuan's cash flow should have stabilized, so he saw considerable potential in the arrangement. Only then did he notice that he had been inside the shop for quite some time without seeing another customer enter. The situation puzzled him because the store was far too impressive to be empty. Sister Chin explained that the Radiance 100 sequence competition was taking place that day on the celestial stairway of Star Tower. Most of the employees and customers had gone to watch. Yuan asked whether she meant Violet Thorn's 100 children selection. She shook her head and explained that this was an even greater event, the Radiant Federation's Radiance 100 sequence. Yuan then left the shop after Sister Chin assured him that his purchases would be delivered shortly. He could hardly believe that the competition had already begun. Yuan immediately checked whether tickets were still available, hoping that seats remained on the elevated viewing platform. He had no intention of missing the event. He quickened his pace, eager to see the strongest combat professionals of the Radiant Federation's younger generation. He also wondered how great the difference truly was between them and Xiaosu. The venue stood at a considerable height, and even from outside, the crowd's deafening cheers could already be heard. Yuan could not help wondering why a virtual world like Starnet still contained places that required visitors to climb stairs. By the time he finally reached the top, he was visibly exhausted. Fortunately, tickets to the elevated platform had no special restrictions. Hearing the crowd roar, Yuan became curious about whom everyone was supporting. That was when he spotted Cloud Stream, the B-hat girl, cheering with tremendous enthusiasm. Hearing someone call her name, she turned her binoculars toward the sound. When she realized Yuan was standing directly beside her, she casually remarked that his face looked enormous. Yuan asked her to lower the binoculars first. Cloud Stream argued that no rule prevented her from supporting both competitors at the same time. No matter who won, she would be happy. She then asked Yuan whom he supported. Copying her reasoning, he said that he was rooting for both sides. The answer immediately pleased her. Laughing, she remarked that Yuan, whom she knew as Old Forest of the Deep Mountains, clearly had excellent taste as well. Yuan reflected that both combat professionals were undoubtedly exceptional. Of course, the real reason for his answer was much simpler. He had no idea who either of them was. Cloud Stream's excitement soon reached its peak, and she suddenly grabbed his hand. Only then did she realize what she had done. She quickly pulled away and stuck out her tongue in embarrassment. Yuan felt slightly offended. After all, she had been the one to grab his hand first. To make up for it, Cloud Stream handed him a telescope so he would not miss any details of the battle. According to her, merely listening to the commentary was not enough. Yuan accepted it with pleasure and thanked her. He realized that although she could be somewhat awkward, she was not a bad person at all. Looking through the telescope, he noticed that the two competitors employed completely different fighting styles. What caught his attention most were the healing-type spiritual creatures. Cloud Stream asked whom he expected to win. Yuan replied that the higher-ranked sequence member should naturally hold the advantage. Furthermore, both competitors were already using gold-grade spiritual creatures. The woman with short black hair streaked with red stepped forward. Her bear-like spiritual creature raised one paw and unleashed a palm strike of molten lava. A wave of flames surged forward, completely engulfing the opposing spiritual creature. The long-haired woman with the calm expression reacted immediately, ordering her snow hibiscus tree to use snow chill on the ice soul grass. The snow hibiscus tree dispersed the flames, largely neutralizing the lava bear's rapid assault. The red-streaked, short-haired woman quickly realized that her opponent's coordinated defense would be difficult to break. Even so, she had no intention of retreating. She commanded the lava bear to use explosive charge and pin down the snow hibiscus tree. The beast rushed forward with flames roaring around its body. Its claws slammed down violently, causing the ground surrounding its opponent to erupt. Yuan was impressed by the attack's raw ferocity. Cloud Stream explained that Lady Shiranui was a power assault spiritual chi professional, while Lady White Devil specialized in healing. Naturally, Lady Shiranui held the advantage in terms of pure offensive impact. However, there was no reason for concern, since Lady White Devil ranked far higher within the sequence. Lady White Devil's real name was Daisy, and she occupied 18th place in the sequence. She quickly healed the snow hibiscus tree and suppressed the lava bear's momentum. Lady Shiranui, whose real name was Anna, held 47th place. She was surprised that Daisy still possessed enough energy to stabilize both of her spiritual creatures under such an aggressive assault. Her offensive, however, was never meant to end with a single charge. Under the relentless pressure of the two bears, the snow hibiscus tree could do little more than defend itself. The crowd began wondering whether the balance of victory was starting to shift. The battle of attrition continued for roughly half an hour. Anna taunted Daisy, pointing out that her spiritual chi reserves were clearly approaching their limit. This made Yuan wonder whether a healing specialist would still be at a disadvantage against a power assault fighter despite holding a much higher ranking. Daisy calmly replied that the gap between 18th and 47th place was not nearly as simple as Anna believed. She activated Snow Chill, causing her spiritual creature's aura to erupt violently, then commanded the Ice Soul Grass to use Extreme Cold Seal. The lava bear roared as layers of ice imprisoned it. Anna was genuinely astonished that Daisy could still unleash such a large-scale technique after fighting for so long. Both lava bears were completely frozen, although the snow hibiscus tree and ice soulgrass also appeared to be in poor condition. Cloud Stream grew nervous. Although Lady White Devil had counterattacked and suppressed Lady Shiranui's offensive, a seal like that could not last forever. The moment it shattered, Lady Shiranui would immediately launch another attack. Yuan, however, knew the situation was not that simple. After all, White Devil was a healer. Just as he expected, Daisy summoned the Resurrection Butterfly and activated Wings of Resurrection. The vitality of her spiritual creatures surged dramatically. The audience held its breath as their injuries recovered almost instantly. Although they had not been healed completely, it was obvious that they had regained their ability to fight. Anna laughed in disbelief, yet continued insisting that she would be the one to win. Then, without warning, her spiritual creature broke through its limits and evolved into a platinum-grade flowing flame giant bear. Daisy admitted that she had not anticipated such a dramatic advancement, but her resolve remained completely unshaken. Instead, she released a swarm of crimson butterflies that spread across the entire arena. Anna mocked her, claiming that no matter what Daisy attempted, she could never break through flowing flame critical strike, a technique combining offense and defense that had been developed specifically to defeat her. Daisy offered no response and simply allowed the butterflies to attack. They passed directly through the giant bear's body. The flowing flame giant bear raised its head and released an agonized roar. Blood erupted from its body as the delayed damage finally detonated, leaving Anna frozen in shock. The sight of her spiritual creature collapsing drove Anna to her knees as the host declared Lady White Devil Daisy the winner. She had earned a glory star on the celestial stairway. With a bitter smile, Anna admitted that she had never expected the Resurrection Butterfly to evolve into a fantasy bloodline while still at gold grade. She accepted her defeat without making excuses. Daisy smiled and extended her hand, explaining that after evolving into a fantasy bloodline, the creature was no longer a resurrection butterfly. It had become a calamity butterfly. She encouraged Anna to cheer up and reminded her that the audience was watching. The crowd immediately erupted in applause. Cloud Stream excitedly shook Yuan, declaring that Lady White Devil was unbelievably powerful. Although Lady Shiranui had lost, her explosive and unforgettable offense was exactly what one would expect from someone who commanded bears. Yuan silently reflected that his sister's battles at school were nothing compared with what he had just witnessed. For the first time, he truly understood the strength of the Radiant Federation's finest young combat professionals. It was time for Cloud Stream to leave. Before departing, she reminded Yuan not to forget about her web-shooting spiders. Yuan still could not overcome his amazement at how terrifying a fantasy bloodline could be. A gold-grade healing spiritual creature had crossed the difference in grade and defeated a platinum-grade combat creature. The willpower rune in his hand was the key to allowing a spiritual creature to evolve into a fantasy bloodline. By coincidence, it was most compatible with healing-type spiritual creatures. However, the only healing spiritual creature he currently possessed was the Lara Lily. Yuan knew that it was still far too early to concern himself with that. At that moment, he heard Een murmuring something resembling meaningless poetry. The starry sky scattered its lonely light. Silence guarded a faint hope, stumbling along the path, unable to see the distance clearly, yet refusing to abandon the desire buried deep within the heart. Yuan entered the room and asked what they were doing, since he could hear them clearly from downstairs. Both of them jumped in surprise. Smarty immediately switched tabs and scolded Yuan for entering without knocking. Yuan could not understand why he should have to knock before entering his own room, which only made him more curious about what they were hiding. Sweating nervously, Smarty explained that Een had merely been practicing her singing and that he was helping her find sheet music. Yuan told Smarty to move aside because he needed to research some information. Een whispered to Smarty, asking whether Yuan had noticed anything. Smarty assured her that everything was fine. He had closed the page quickly enough, and the account had been registered secretly so Yuan would never discover it. Yuan read that promoting a copper-grade spiritual creature to legendary quality required at least C-rank spiritual chi. Otherwise, he would have immediately placed the two web-shooting spiders in an online auction. Even so, they could still command a high price. Just then, the doorbell rang, so Yuan went downstairs. It was Ostrich Logistics. Delivery worker 457 had arrived on time with the items Yuan had purchased through Starnet. The experienced courier hurried his novice partner along, telling her to move the valuable goods quickly. Smarty became curious, and Yuan casually explained that everything was intended for the shop's future development. The girl carried several boxes while introducing herself as Ano, then quickly corrected herself and said that she was the novice courier Tris Iwapatsu and I. Seeing that she was holding the boxes incorrectly and that they were about to slip, Yuan stepped in and offered to carry them. The aquarium balanced on top of the stack suddenly tipped over. Smarty threw himself forward and managed to catch the container, but the water Water splashed all over his face. He hurriedly checked whether the fish was still inside. Fortunately, Yin had already caught it. The experienced courier immediately scolded the novice for nearly causing an accident. She apologized sincerely, but Yuan waved it off and assured her that everyone made mistakes sometimes. Meanwhile, Smarty stared at the fish with his mouth watering. Seeing the boxes piled throughout the shop, Yin was astonished. Smarty asked whether they were opening an energy ore farm. Yuan explained that expanding their scale was the only way to increase their profits. He also could not help noticing how strong the new courier was. Carrying 2,000 crates of energy ore into the room was no small feat. Even with spiritual chi strengthening her body, reaching that level through training from a young age was still impressive. Yuan told Smarty and Yin to go upstairs and play while he entered seclusion to cultivate. He also reminded Smarty that all the material from the knowledge chip had already been transferred to his StarNet account, so he needed to begin studying immediately. Smarty acknowledged the instruction, grabbed his biscuits, and left. Yuan then activated Spirit Lock. It was time to raise the goldfish's level. 1 hour later, the fish had already grown too large for the aquarium. Yuan discovered that advancing it from normal grade to elite grade consumed several times more spiritual chi than evolving a green vine. Despite that, the spiritual power returned to him was roughly the same. He finally understood why spirit siphon goldfish were notorious for being so difficult to raise. Yuan began wondering how he could channel that much additional spiritual chi into the spirit lock space. 2 days later, the fish was transferred into a large spirit transformation pool where it could swim freely. Mobius complained that it was jealous. Unlike Mobius, the fish was not alone, and unlike the fish, Mobius was constantly being disturbed for no reason. Yuan poured more energy ore into the pool while pointing out that Mobius had not helped at all during the past few days. Yuan had personally carried more than 1,000 crates of ore. Mobius retorted that it was still in a spiritual body state. Yuan finally reached the space's limit, and the spiritual chi concentration inside Spirit Lock became completely saturated. If Mobius wanted to increase it any further, it would have to wait until its next advancement. Mobius replied that as long as it continued evolving, the maximum capacity would keep rising. For now, the concentration was probably only around 5 times greater than in the outside world. Yuan watched the spirit siphon goldfish continuously absorb the spiritual chi within the space, his expectations rising. The fish was destined to become the shop's signature product. Even so, it would be far better if it awakened a draconic bloodline. That was precisely why Yuan had chosen the Dragon Eye variety. He brought several boxes into the space, prompting Mobius to ask what they contained. Yuan revealed that they held web-shooting spiders. Sales of the elite-grade green vines had been reasonable, but he still needed products with more distinctive qualities. Mobius asked why the spiders had to be placed inside the spirit lock space to evolve. Yuan explained that the rate at which spiritual chi transformed them inside the space was also 5 times faster than it was outside. With that settled, Yuan got to work and successfully raised the spiders' quality to epic. He breathed a sigh of relief. Improving them to epic quality had taken just over 2 hours inside the space, whereas it would have required at least 12 hours outside. At that moment, a message arrived on his phone. As expected, one spider had been valued at 1.1 radiant coins, while the other was worth 1.3. Excited, Yuan planned to place the remaining 2 up for auction as well. His immediate objective was simple: achieve his first modest financial goal. Mobius remarked that Yuan was gradually becoming obsessed with money. Another notification then appeared. Yuan had received a tip of 500 Federation coins from Lord Sun, along with a message encouraging him to keep up the good work and continue his live broadcasts. Yuan was confused, since when could a shop on StarNet receive tips? Then the realization struck him. He rushed upstairs, where Yin's singing could already be heard clearly. Yuan threw the door open and demanded to know what the 2 of them were doing. Both jumped in fright, and Smarty hurriedly claimed that they were studying. Yuan tried to approach the computer to verify that, but the 2 blocked his path. His eyes widened when he discovered that they had secretly become virtual streamers. The chat was filled with praise for Yin's beautiful voice. Many viewers had become completely captivated by the song and searched for it on StarNet, only to discover that it was an original composition. Some had even sent tips, while others wondered why the streamers' faces were concealed behind animated images. They had named the channel Kwai In Lu. Yuan remarked that without their shared income and expense system, he would never have discovered that the 2 had begun a career behind his back. Yin was proud of the name. It suited her perfectly because she loved eating green vines, and Smarty had been the one to create it. Yuan could see how pleased she was. Since neither of them dared reveal their faces, he became curious about why they had chosen virtual streaming. Yin explained that Smarty believed it was the only way to distinguish themselves from others in the same category. Yuan then decided to question Smarty. Smarty explained that studying for several hours every day left him exhausted, existed, so he preferred to devote that time to helping Enin use hers more efficiently. Yuan saw that the account had already been active for several days. Although the live chat contained plenty of comments, the channel had almost no followers. Since it was only a minor hobby, he decided to let them enjoy themselves. While other sound birds preferred practicing their control over sound waves, Yin's kind had simply loved singing from an early age. Yuan stopped being angry, deciding that using their talents and interests productively was a good thing. Yet even then, they no longer had merely a handful of followers. Yuan had not yet realized what kind of legend Kuai Yin Lu would eventually become in the streaming world. The two were delighted to finally receive his permission, but Yuan imposed several conditions. They could not accept inappropriate tips, and the maximum donation was set at 500 Federation coins. He also wanted them to change categories and move into virtual dubbing. The two became so excited that Yin placed Smarty on her back and raced away. Yuan remarked that the children had grown up and no longer listened to him. Mobius observed that the pair were certainly interesting. Yuan did not want to discuss them any further at the moment. He was more concerned about how to raise Mobius's level. The spiritual chi concentration inside the space had already reached a bottleneck, yet it still could not keep pace with the consumption of the spiritual creatures he was cultivating. The prerequisite for increasing Mobius's level was nurturing other spiritual creatures until they evolved. Although Yuan could accelerate that process by transforming spiritual chi, his efficiency remained limited by his own professional rank as a spiritual chi user. To accelerate the process significantly, he would first need to increase Mobius's level. It was a vicious cycle. Mobius suggested focusing on quality instead, since the cost of raising levels was so high. However, that would not solve the problem. Improving a spiritual creature's quality alone would not increase its level. Yuan also wanted every creature to realize its full potential. Advancing the Dragon Eye Spirit Siphon Goldfish would require at least 3 drops of Dragon Beast blood. For the Lara Lily to attempt an evolution to legendary quality, it would need 1 portion of Resurrection Soil, 2 red Sequoia tree cores, and 1 liter of Flora spring water. Faced with those requirements, Yuan had no choice but to contact Sister Qin. She answered the call but was surprised to hear that he wanted Dragon Beast blood, since it was far from inexpensive. Privately, however, she was delighted. Her judgment had been correct. He truly was a major patron, someone who had spent nearly 5 radiant coins during his very first visit to the shop. She provided him with a quote. Gold-grade Dragon Beast blood cost 80 radiant coins, while platinum-grade blood was priced at 2,000 radiant coins per drop. If he purchased it in bulk, she would offer a discount and guarantee that it had not been diluted. His prolonged silence made her ask whether he was still on the line. In reality, Yuan was close to tears because he could not afford it. Clearing his throat, he explained that he was only asking for the time being. He then ordered 4,000 crates of low-grade energy stones and 3 normal-grade Spirit Siphon goldfish. Sister Qin assured him that she could arrange everything easily. After ending the call, she calculated his purchasing cycle and concluded that the next time he contacted her, he would probably be ready to buy the Dragon Beast blood. She decided to prepare in advance, since she had gained a highly promising patron. 2 hours later, several more goldfish were swimming in the pool. Mobius remarked that the delivery had arrived almost unbelievably fast. Yuan had only just finished raising 5 web-shooting spiders to epic quality, yet the money he had earned over the past several days had already fallen back to just 0.4 radiant coins. More than half of the spiritual chi inside the space had also been consumed. Yuan envied the goldfish for living such carefree lives as he began feeding them. The first goldfish placed in the pool suddenly became aggressive. Yuan was confused, since they had originally lived together in the same tank. The spirit transformation pool was merely larger, yet they had already begun fighting. Mobius told him that he was being far too naive. This was natural selection, the survival of the fittest. Evolution was, by nature, the most creative ability granted to living beings. Regardless of species, spiritual creatures would never willingly share spiritual chi and would compete for it even against former companions. Yuan understood that this was why the strong continued growing stronger while the weak struggled to advance. Mobius was pleased that he had grasped the principle. When Yuan entered his online shop, he found 2 people arguing despite the clear notice stating that the product was sold out. The girl complained that when she saw the monk, she had allowed him to place his order first, only for him to shamelessly purchase everything. The monk calmly replied that the Buddha taught people not to steal. This only made her angrier. She grabbed him by the collar, furious that she had helped him and was now being lectured in return. She challenged him to settle the matter offline. Yuan shouted at them to stop arguing or take their dispute outside his shop. He then displayed the web-shooting spiders. The monk was shocked, immediately recognizing them as the work of a 2-star creator. The girl could hardly believe that they had reached epic quality. Yuan clarified that the spiders were custom orders and were not available for sale. The monk asked about the requirements for commissioning a custom order. Yuan explained that he was not accepting any more commissions that month and would resume the service no earlier than the following month. At the same time, both customers asked whether he still had any elite-grade green vines. Unfortunately, they were sold out and Yuan would no longer be offering them. Instead, he introduced his next products, vines. He introduced copper-grade green vines and an elite-grade spirit siphon goldfish, then opened both products for pre-orders. The girl offered 5 radiant coins to reserve a copper-grade green vine, while the monk bid 8 radiant coins for the spirit siphon goldfish. They wanted the items registered under their names so no one else could claim them. From their behavior, Yuan could tell that both were experienced buyers, even though they had researched the market prices beforehand. He warned them that if they argued again, they would both be immediately blacklisted from the shop. What Yuan did not know was that the two were secretly working together behind the scenes. The entire situation left him completely exhausted. He realized that the shop needed clear rules immediately, so he posted them in the most visible place possible. The monk said that he would await good news, then turned and left. Noticing that the girl was still there, Yuan asked whether she had another matter to discuss. He explained that he had no other spiritual creatures available for sale. After hesitating briefly, she asked whether he could heal a spiritual creature. The question immediately caught his attention. She explained that the creature had suffered severe injuries and damage to its foundation. Yuan said that if it was below silver rank, he could attempt to treat it. The girl lit up with joy, declaring that her daughter's spiritual creature could finally be saved. Yuan froze when he heard the word daughter. He could hardly believe it, since the woman appeared to be around the same age as his sister. She then revealed that her daughter's copper rank spiritual creature had been injured during training near a dimensional rift. Its roots had been burned by a horned demon. This surprised Yuan. Horned demons possessed hornfire, which had withering properties. If it struck a plant-type spiritual creature, the damage would be devastating. He finally understood why the creature's foundation had been damaged. She thanked him repeatedly and asked about the cost. She admitted that she did not currently have enough money, but promised to gather the full amount by the following month. Yuan waved the matter aside and said that it was not a problem, since he would not have time to treat the creature that month anyway. He asked her to bring it back the following month. As for payment, he did not want money. He wanted something else, revitalization soil. She stared at him in disbelief, unable to accept that this alone would be enough. Naturally, she accepted the agreement without hesitation and promised to find the item for him. If she succeeded, they could discuss the treatment fee again. Yuan was genuinely surprised. Even Sister Qin had been unable to obtain revitalization soil, which meant the woman definitely had access to the right connections. His problem concerning the soil could now be considered resolved. Flora spring water could be obtained with money. That left only the redwood tree core. Yuan wondered whether it could be acquired only through an auction at the treasure pavilion. Deciding not to think too far ahead, Yuan sent Cloudstream a message informing her that the web shooting spiders were ready and that she should come quickly. Cloudstream appeared almost instantly, leaving Yuan stunned by her speed. She accused him of cheating, demanding to know how he could possibly produce 5 epic quality spiders in only a few days. Even she had not expected him to work so quickly. She assured him that she would begin winding the transparent spider silk immediately. After inspecting the products and confirming their quality, she declared herself extremely satisfied and asked him to arrange the delivery. Her excitement was obvious. Yuan reminded her that one of the web shooting spiders possessed the deadly venom ability and advised her to be careful with her hair. She immediately shouted that she had not been bitten deliberately and that her hair was already growing back. Once the payment had been transferred, she left. Yuan wondered why she was always so irritable, but at least he finally had capital again. It was time to expand production. He immediately ordered more materials to keep the money flowing. The butterfly-tailed spirit goldfish were also selling well, and he needed to replenish his supply of green vines. Noticing Smarty's wide eyes, Yuan asked whether he had pushed him too hard with all the studying. Smarty said that was not the problem. There were simply several concepts he could not understand. He asked Yuan about the complexity of spiritual creature evolution. Yuan asked what exactly he meant. Smarty explained that evolution was not solely intended to improve a creature's survival or combat abilities. If that were its only purpose, spiritual creatures would be unable to sustain themselves throughout the evolutionary process. The theory was abstract and difficult to grasp. Yuan tried to think of a more concrete example and pointed to the green vine, something Smarty knew extremely well because he ate it every day. Yuan asked him to imagine that he was a green vine and describe how he would evolve to ensure his survival. Smarty replied that he would eliminate his leaves so no one could eat him, develop toxicity to prevent accidental consumption, and become extremely resilient so that he required less water. Yuan pictured a poisonous cactus, then told Smarty that his entire line of reasoning was wrong. Smarty was shocked. He had believed that his logic was perfectly suited to survival. Yuan then showed him the green vine's copper rank evolved form. Smarty immediately realized how different it was from what he had imagined. It was fresh, succulent, and genuinely delicious, almost as though it wanted to be eaten. Yuan explained that the green vine's evolutionary path was essentially an announcement to every spiritual creature that it could produce food, and exceptionally delicious food at that. As a result, other spiritual creatures would protect it, care for it, and ensure its survival. That was how it secured its place within the ecosystem. Smarty muttered that he would still choose to evolve into something completely inedible. The worse he tasted, the better. Yuan said that excessive studying had narrowed Smarty's thinking, preventing him from understanding the concept. He suggested that they go outside for a walk. Smarty was delighted, since it had been a long time since they had gone out together. Yuan admitted that they had relied far too heavily on online shopping lately. Standing before a giant screen, they watched City Lord Lin Xiao announce that the Radiant Federation's Creator Guild would reform the Creator Certification Assessment. Anyone who completed the 1-star Creator examination within 2 hours would be allowed to skip 3 lifestyle profession advancement assessments and directly challenge the 2-star Creator examination. The announcement was incredible news for Yuan. It meant that he could aim directly for 2-star certification. He silently vowed to achieve it whatever the cost. Inin also expressed her support. The next news segment focused on the Federation. Recent investigations indicated that the dimensional rifts were about to enter a 6-month active period, during which a tide of exotic beasts would emerge. The Radiant Federation would therefore enter a state of combat readiness. Citizens were advised to prepare in advance and remain calm throughout the active period. The Federation would deploy spirit guards to help resist the exotic beast tide, while images of fully uniformed guards appeared across the screen. Yuan suddenly remembered asking his parents where they were going when he was still young. They had told him to take good care of himself, explaining that they would be gone for a while but would return before he woke up. The next day, however, an injured man arrived with news about his parents. Xiaosu woke up and asked where they were, forcing Yuan to tell her that they would not be coming back. She burst into tears, and Yuan embraced her, promising that he would take care of her. As he spoke, he clutched his parents' badges tightly in his hands and stood there without moving. Yuan failed to notice Yin and Smarty panicking as they tried to get his attention. When he finally returned to his senses, he hugged them both and assured them that he was fine. That was their signal to head home. Only then did Yuan realize that the badges his parents had carried bore the insignia of the spirit guards. The moment Yuan arrived home, he sat down and began searching for information on the computer. Just as he suspected, the dimensional rift that had opened outside Chia County 10 years earlier had indeed been handled by the spirit guards. He read through several reports. According to the records, a powerful energy source had been detected deep inside the rift. His eyes moved rapidly across the articles. At 7 in the morning, a level 4 swamp dragonfly broke through the defensive line and severely injured 30 defenders before being suppressed by the Wind and Thunder Squad. At 3 in the afternoon, a level 5 rotten bone silkworm emerged, using corrosive attacks and corpse control. The Captain General soon arrived with elite forces and began sealing the rift while eliminating the threat. By approximately 8 that evening, the creature had been critically wounded, although the surrounding land remained corroded. There were no civilian deaths, but 120 people had been severely injured and 53 were missing. The rift was expected to be sealed within 72 hours. The rotten bone silkworm felt painfully familiar to Yuan. He also learned that bone devouring was a mutually destructive ability that the creature could activate only by sacrificing itself after being pushed to its absolute limit. After putting all the clues together, Yuan realized that Uncle Lee had been a member of the spirit guards. His gaze slowly lowered toward the badges his parents had left behind. To the south lay lava, to the north sealed ice, to the west stretched an immense desert, and to the east swamps swallowed the land. The Radiant Federation existed within the narrow gaps separating those deadly regions, while countless spiritual creatures roamed both within and around its borders. The spirit guards were the protective organization responsible for handling disasters involving spiritual creatures and invasions by exotic beasts. Yuan wondered whether his parents had been assigned to such a dangerous post. They had never mentioned anything about it. Then he noticed faint inscriptions on their badges. After wiping away the dried blood, he uncovered the numbers 2, 8, and 37. He wondered whether these were their registration numbers within the spirit guards. Yuan tried searching for more information online, but a red exclamation mark suddenly flashed across the screen. He had triggered a restricted access barrier, and further online searches were no longer permitted. He considered asking Aunt Jiang, but she had accompanied Uncle Lee to a medical examination. They had been close friends of his parents, and Yuan suspected that they knew the truth. Judging from Uncle Lee's injuries, he had probably witnessed what happened back then and might even have been a spirit guard himself. Suddenly, someone knocked on the front door. It was already late at night. Yuan initially assumed that Aunt Jiang had returned, but but she would never knock like that. Xiaosu was busy preparing for the 100 Children banquet, so she would not be coming home. Even if she did return, she would notify him beforehand. Anyone connected to his Starnet transactions would contact him by phone. This made Yuan both cautious and curious about who could be outside. The rhythm of the knocking changed, as though someone else had taken over. The worst possible scenario crossed his mind. His ability to enhance and evolve spiritual creatures had been exposed, and someone had come to abduct him. Smarty and Inin woke up and asked who it was. Smarty jokingly wondered whether Yuan had stolen someone else's business. Yuan told him to stop talking nonsense. His inventory was far too limited for him to have threatened anyone's interests. Lowering his voice, he instructed Inin that if he stepped backward after opening the door, she was to immediately unleash turbulence and sound Thorn at the entrance, regardless of who came inside. Yuan opened the door only slightly and asked whom they were looking for. A man and a woman stood outside. The man asked whether he was the son of Yin Yang and Yun Yang. Yuan asked whether they had known his parents. The woman immediately produced a badge, clearly aware that he would recognize it. She gently remarked that she had not expected him to have grown so much, then introduced them both. They belonged to the spirit guards. Her name was Sujin, though she preferred to be called Aunt Su, while the man beside her was Don Gai. He asked whether Yuan had recently attempted to access the spirit guard's internal database. They had traced him through that attempt. This confirmed everything. His parents truly had been members of the spirit guards. Don Gai explained that it was a long story. The aftermath of that battle had been extraordinarily chaotic. At the time, many spirit guards had carried out missions under concealed identities, making the later investigation extremely difficult. The headquarters follow-up process still contained unresolved gaps. They apologized for arriving so late, and then he handed Yuan a blood-stained piece of cloth. Yuan asked what it was. Don Gai replied that it concerned the future of Yuan and Xiaosu. Something had been written on the cloth. Yuan recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to his mother. Don Gai explained that the missions undertaken by the spirit guards were extraordinarily dangerous. For that reason, Aunt Jiang and Uncle Li had chosen to conceal the truth from him. They had quietly watched over and protected the siblings throughout all those years. He hoped Yuan would not blame them. Rubbing his eyes, Yuan said that he held no resentment toward them. If anything, they deserved his gratitude, since their protection had allowed him and his sister to grow up safely. Don Gai, who asked Yuan to call him Uncle Dong, also promised to stand by him. If Yuan ever needed assistance, he could come to him. Aunt Su suddenly remembered something important and reminded Uncle Dong about it. The item had been obtained using every merit point accumulated by Yuan's parents, along with repeated requests from old Jiang and the others. Yuan asked what item they were referring to. Uncle Dong replied that it was a source seed. When Yuan asked what that meant, Aunt Su explained that dimensional rifts brought more than tides of exotic beasts. They also produced various treasures known as source-type items. A dimensional rift would close permanently only after its source-type item had been removed. The source seed was one such treasure, capable of sealing a level 2 dimensional rift. Uncle Dong believed that the source seed was perfectly suited to Yuan. Old Li had told him that Yuan suffered an accident while cultivating as a child, leaving his body physically weak. Forming contracts with spiritual creatures required enormous amounts of energy, but a source seed needed only fresh blood to grow. It depended on neither mental strength nor spiritual chi. As Yuan carefully examined the seed, Aunt Su explained that it could be cultivated into a spiritual creature. Throughout the cultivation process, its abilities and path of development could be guided freely. Because of Yuan's fragile health, she recommended developing it into a healing-type spiritual creature that would greatly benefit his body in the future. Healing types also matched Yuan's current affinity. However, pure healing power alone was not enough to survive in that world. Yuan knew that he still needed combat strength, just like Daisy, also known as White Devil. Aunt Su then handed him a Federal Central Bank card containing 100 radiant coins. She described it as both a gift and compensation that had been delayed for 10 years. Uncle Dong also gave Yuan a card, knowing that cultivating a source seed and paying for his sister's education would be expensive. He told Yuan to consider it interest accumulated over the past decade. Yuan refused to accept the money. He opened the door. Smarty leaped onto his head and remarked that Yuan had 2 wonderful families. Uncle Dong, who had lived at least 20 years longer than Yuan, offered him a piece of advice. He insisted that Yuan accept the money. Aunt Su noticed that Yuan had only recently recovered physically. She concluded that Smarty and Inin were still merely elite-grade creatures. Most people his age already possessed bronze-rank creatures or higher, making it clear that Yuan had little genuine combat experience. She asked whether he wanted to learn more about his parents' work. A level 1 dimensional rift in Xia Prefecture was connected to the spiritual beast realm. If Yuan wished, she could take him there to observe how the spirit suppression division operated. Even though it was only a level level 1 rift, some danger remained. Before she could finish speaking, Yuan said that he wanted to go. He believed they already knew about his previous condition. He had missed far too much of the world, and with such an opportunity before him, he had no intention of letting it pass. The dimensional rift would enter an active period within 6 months, and a beast tide was approaching. Preparing early was therefore the wisest choice. Aunt Sue found his attitude promising and believed that he possessed talent. Uncle Dong quietly warned her that they should be more cautious, but she elbowed him and told him to remain silent. She instructed him to eliminate the insectoids while she remained nearby to protect Yuan. She then told Yuan to prepare himself because they would be leaving immediately. Yuan examined the attributes of her spiritual beast. It was a fluffy feathered snow owl from the overfeather family and snow owl genus. It had reached platinum rank, level 8 out of 10, possessed wind and ice attributes, and was of perfect quality. One of its abilities was Feather Assault, which unleashed rapid wing strikes while firing razor-sharp feathers. Feather Shield used its thick plumage to block damage. Snow Feather Spike launched frozen feathers that immobilized targets and inflicted area damage upon the ground. Snow Step condensed airflow along the terrain, creating an avalanche field that released freezing attacks in every direction. Snow Protection summoned Extreme Cold to form solid ice shields around multiple targets while granting them resistance to ice. Its exclusive trait, Rapid Freeze, increased its affinity with ice and caused its ice abilities to freeze targets more quickly. Yuan was stunned. A creature summoned so casually had already reached platinum rank and possessed so many abilities. He had initially assumed that it was merely a defensive spiritual beast, but it truly lived up to the reputation of the Spirit Suppression Division. Een stared at the enormous bird in amazement, wondering whether she might become that powerful one day. Yuan promised to train her as well as he possibly could. Smarty also wanted to accompany them, so Yuan asked Uncle Dong whether the two little creatures could come along. Uncle Dong agreed, since he would be protecting everyone regardless. Both of them became excited at the prospect of riding such a massive bird. Een loved how it felt, saying that it was like velvet. Smarty asked whether she even knew what velvet felt like. Een admitted that she did not, but insisted that this was how she imagined it. Before long, they were soaring through the sky. Eventually, they arrived before the dimensional rift where military personnel stopped them and stated that unauthorized individuals were forbidden from entering. Uncle Dong gave his full name and affiliation, requesting access to the restricted zone so that he could lead a basic clearing operation. Once his identity had been verified, they were permitted to enter and flew. Farther ahead, the region was already within the dimensional rift's area of influence. From time to time, insectoids fell from above. That was why so many violet thorn guards had been stationed there. Yuan silently vowed to remain cautious. Suddenly, loud noises echoed around them, and Een and Smarty clung tightly to him. A spiritual beast appeared behind the group. Uncle Dong immediately charged toward it. Yuan watched in shock as Uncle Dong tore the insectoid apart with a single strike, relying only on the spiritual energy tempering his body. At that moment, Yuan truly understood the strength of the Spirit Suppression Division. Aunt Sue told him not to be nervous, explaining that most insectoids were only elite grade and that very few had reached bronze rank. Even so, Yuan knew that elite grade enemies were already dangerous to him. Uncle Dong moved ahead of the group. He summoned a wolf-like spiritual beast and positioned it directly in the center of the battlefield. Yuan became uneasy when he saw it surrounded from every direction. Uncle Dong told him not to rush, explaining that the beast needed time to prepare. He then ordered the pack to begin hunting. The spiritual beast was a dark terror wolf of the Dread Wolf genus and Black Fang clan. It had reached monarch rank, level 10 out of 10, and possessed exceptional quality. Its supreme ability was Eclipse Domain. Bite tore into enemies and caused bleeding, while Claw Strike ripped through targets with lethal force. Charging Lock used gravity to suppress and capture targets, with its effectiveness depending on the enemy's strength. Black Ray fired dark element energy from its mouth, inflicting massive magical damage. The Wolf's Howl unleashed a powerful sonic attack. Its passive ability, Night Hunter, enhanced its tracking abilities and senses. Its special trait, Dark Entity, granted it an almost limitless supply of energy while fighting in darkness. Yuan was deeply impressed. Its abilities and exclusive trait were perfectly suited for prolonged battles with tremendous explosive damage. Merely witnessing the fight had already made the journey worthwhile. In the blink of an eye, every enemy had been eliminated. Uncle Dong told Yuan that the situation was not dangerous. Yuan noticed Een behaving strangely and asked what was wrong. She replied that something was watching them. She was right. A crow was hovering nearby. Its eyes were crimson, its chest had been torn open, and white bones were exposed beneath the wound. Yuan still believed that the journey would not be dangerous. Smarty was relieved to hear that. Suddenly, Een leaped from Yuan's arms and warned him to be careful, saying that something felt wrong. Yuan shouted for her to stop. Only then then did Yuan realize that Aunt Sue and Uncle Dong had vanished. A strange sensation came over him. When he looked again, he found himself riding on the back of a sinister giant crow. Uncle Dong remarked that he felt uneasy. Aunt Sue reminded him not to lower his guard, since something still seemed to be watching them. He complained that she had jinxed it. Aunt Sue told Yuan to stay where he was while they dealt with the minor threats, assuring him that there was nothing to worry about. Her fluffy feathered snow owl unleashed Snow Feather Spike, wiping out several spiritual beasts at once. Uncle Dong thought that this would be the most dangerous situation they encountered that day. However, Aunt Sue sensed that something was wrong. Yuan had not moved for a long time, so she asked Uncle Dong to check on him. When he examined Yuan, his face looked normal and his breathing remained steady. Uncle Dong said that Yuan had merely fallen asleep. In truth, Yuan's consciousness was sinking. Yin shouted for him to hold on to her, so Yuan grabbed her tiny legs. Smarty told her to hold firm, and she tried as hard as she could. However, she could not keep herself steady, and all of them fell. Yuan felt something strange. It did not seem as though he were falling from a great height. On the contrary, it felt as if the ground itself was welcoming him. Since he was not injured, he began wondering whether the enemy had no intention of killing him. A voice told him that he was correct. It said that the beings outside the rift controlled all the land and resources, while those inside had to fight and bleed merely to survive. It was the crow. It offered Yuan a wager. If the crow won, Yuan would have to remain there forever. Yuan was shocked to realize that it could speak, but the crow had no desire to continue the conversation. It was furious that they kept calling it an insectoid when it did not even have the right to live peacefully outside the rift. The spiritual beast summoned a pack of wolves. Yin attacked with turbulence, shouting for them to stay away from Yuan. Smarty boasted that they also had a giant bird and a giant wolf on their side. Hearing him mention those spiritual beasts, the crow created terrifying copies of Aunt Sue and Uncle Dong. It used its power to restrain Yin and Smarty. Wolves surrounded them as their strength was slowly drained away. Uncle Dong and Aunt Sue shouted for Yuan to run. Yuan enveloped everyone in a golden aura and told them to calm their minds. Smarty was confused about what was happening. Yuan realized that everything around them was an illusion. Uncle Dong and Aunt Sue were not truly there. They had disappeared because the crow had failed to drag them into the illusion. The creature was called the Three-Eyed Crow Lord, a member of the Corvidi family. It was an elite grade, level 2 psychic type spiritual beast of common quality. One of its abilities was Illusory Dream Eye. By locking eyes with an enemy, it could pull them into a low-level illusion and force them to witness terrifying scenes that weakened their will. However, the ability worked only on weaker spiritual creatures. The crow was stunned that Yuan had seen through the illusion. It had never expected a human boy to break free from its power. That only made it even more determined to kill him. Smarty asked whether the attacks were illusions as well. Yuan explained that although they only appeared real, the damage they inflicted was genuine. The Three-Eyed Crow Lord warned that its next attack would not be false. Yuan realized that its technique could almost perfectly replicate the abilities of elite-grade spiritual beasts. Yuan instructed Yin to use turbulence and target the wolves' legs. Once their faces were exposed, Smarty was to strike them. Since they were merely illusory clones, Yuan believed they should be weak. Yin followed his command. Smarty charged forward and clawed at the wolves. To their shock, the clones were completely unaffected. Yuan told the Three-Eyed Crow Lord that fighting this way was pointless and that it could never defeat him. The crow disagreed. Yuan was a human who possessed spiritual beasts, while it was nothing more than an aberrant insect with nothing of its own. Suddenly, the crow increased its level within the illusion and charged at Yuan, screaming that battle brought satisfaction, destruction created justice, and slaughter restored balance. It raged about how humans enjoyed food and clean air, while the creatures trapped inside the dimensional rift were forced to kill one another merely to survive. One of the wolves was about to sink its teeth into Yuan when the source seed slipped from his pocket. Yin and Smarty were also being overwhelmed. The crow believed that survival led only to suffering and that destruction was the sole path to eternity. Suddenly, golden light erupted through the wolves. The crow froze in shock. Yuan remained completely unharmed. The source seed was actively resisting the illusion. Yuan realized that the crow's power could strengthen nearby spiritual beasts, but that same ability could also be turned against it. He told Yin to attack the crow's weak point and finish it off. They already knew where it was, so they immediately charged forward. The crow's body was torn apart. It appeared disappointed, as though it had expected its fortune to change, but Yuan had defeated it. Among the creature's remains, Yuan saw a massacre rune. He wondered whether the true nature of exotic beasts was nothing more than endless slaughter. Afterward, Uncle Dong shook Yuan awake and said that they were heading back. He asked whether the flock of crows had frightened him. Yuan opened his eyes and said that it had not. Uncle Dong remarked to Aunt Sue that Yuan looked exhausted. Yuan then asked where he should train if he wanted to to become stronger. Uncle Dong replied that he should visit the Star Tower, the finest place for genuine combat training. It was already late at night, and Smarty and Een were sleeping soundly. Yuan removed the source seed from the container holding the cores. He recalled everything that had happened inside the illusion. The seed had changed only after absorbing his blood. Now he knew what it would become after evolving, as well as the fact that forming a contract with it required blood. Yuan therefore cut open his own hand. He allowed the blood to drip onto the seed, choosing to take the risk in the hope that it would become a spiritual creature with offensive power. He was stunned by how quickly it absorbed his blood. Suddenly, a loud voice echoed inside his mind, urging him to continue and not stop. They had established a mental connection, and Yuan could feel an overwhelming hunger emanating from the seed. He lost so much blood that his face turned pale. Yuan used the Lara lily to slow the bleeding. Eventually, it stopped. The seed had transformed into a plant. He had never expected it to require so much blood. Since it was plant-based, Yuan wondered whether it might possess something resembling the mouth of a carnivorous plant. Just as in the illusion, a strange humanoid plant appeared before him. Its head resembled a rose, and a broad smile filled with razor-sharp teeth stretched across its face. Yuan stared at it in amazement. It was exactly what he had wanted. From that moment onward, he named it Red Thorn. He tried feeding Red Thorn a radish, but it shook its head. He then offered it a core only for it to refuse again. Yuan grew nervous, fearing that it wanted more of his blood. He knew he could not endure that a second time. Smarty woke up and told him to go to sleep. Yuan replied that he was fine. He knew that both Smarty and Een were exhausted after the previous day. Smarty noticed the plant and immediately realized that it resembled the one from the illusion. Yuan introduced Red Thorn as their new companion. Smarty became excited and asked whether she would become as powerful as she had been before. He then asked whether he would grow stronger as well. Yuan warned him not to be impatient. Smarty was still only elite grade. Once he advanced to copper rank, he would undergo a major transformation and enter an entirely new stage. Een woke up and asked what they were discussing. Yuan suggested that they all rest and recover so they could prepare for their advancement to copper rank. 1 week later, they gathered in the courtyard. Yuan's body had recovered considerably, and while nurturing the source seed, his spiritual energy had also become purer. Advancing to copper rank should no longer have been difficult. Golden energy enveloped Een. She evolved into a flowing cloud egret, a member of the blue sparrow family and winged bird genus. She had reached copper rank, level 1 out of 10, possessed sound and air attributes, and remained at common quality. Her abilities were Sound Thorn, which fired 3 projectiles formed from sound, and Turbulent Flow, which released rapid and unstable air currents with every beat of her wings. Yuan was confused. Ordinarily, there should have been a songbird stage between her previous form and this one. However, Een had barely changed while at elite grade, and her species had remained the same. It appeared that she had skipped an entire evolutionary stage. Now it was time to choose her exclusive trait. The available options were Oily Feathers, which reduced damage by coating her plumage in oil, Clear Skies, which dispersed clouds and cleared the sky after her song ended, and Borrowed Wind, which reduced stamina consumption during flight. Yuan had not expected to receive 3 choices. He considered them carefully. In group battles like the one inside the illusion, reducing damage or moving faster might still leave them vulnerable to control. However, an ability capable of altering the weather could help them escape danger or even launch a counterattack, just as Een had done before. In the end, Yuan chose Clear Skies. Smarty told Een that she looked far more refined now. She beamed with delight and said that she could finally sing and dance at the same time during her live streams. Smarty became excited and announced that it was his turn. Yuan told him not to rush. When the process began, Smarty appeared uncomfortable. Yuan was about to suggest stopping, but Smarty insisted on continuing. Yuan completed the evolution as quickly as possible. Smarty's spiritual energy remained extremely stable, so Yuan believed there would be no complications. Suddenly, Smarty asked him to wait because his nose was itching. The moment he sneezed, his appearance changed. Yuan felt disappointed by how ordinary the evolution seemed, but Een encouraged Smarty to look at himself and brought over a mirror. Smarty was overjoyed, declaring that he finally looked like a true scholar. 3 options then appeared for his exclusive trait. Dust Barrier repelled dust and kept the surrounding environment clean. Item Form allowed him to transform into an object that his contractor could use. Pain Amplification multiplied the pain experienced by enemies after they were attacked, with its effectiveness determined by a contest of mental strength. From a combat perspective, Dust Barrier could counter Earth and Sand-type users, while Pain Amplification would increase the suffering caused by attacks. Item Form, however, seemed like a gamble. Smarty suggested choosing Item Form. Yuan asked whether he was certain, and Smarty explained that he was not a combat-type spiritual creature, so the other 2 options would provide little practical help in battle. Yuan found the explanation brutally honest. Smarty Smarty ran up to him and threatened that if he transformed into something useless, he would cut off his own tail and end everything. Smarty's updated status appeared. He was now a Bicon beast of the spiritual feline family and wisdom cat genus. He had reached copper rank, level 1 out of 10, possessed the mental attribute, and remained at common quality. His abilities included precise memory, which allowed him to recall even the smallest details, and knowledge analysis, which examined stored information from multiple perspectives. His exclusive trait was item form. The trait allowed him to transform into an item for his contractor to use. Yuan activated the ability, and Smarty turned into a pair of glasses. Smarty was disappointed, but Yuan said they would not understand the trait's true power until he tried them on. Yuan placed the glasses over his eyes. When he looked at In, information immediately appeared before him. It revealed that she was delighted with her evolution and even displayed her thoughts, including her desire for chestnut bread filled with shredded meat from the shop on the next street. A profile of the flowing cloud egret also appeared, explaining that the species normally inhabited high mountains. There was even a reminder telling Yuan not to forget to brush her feathers. Yuan was deeply impressed. He then noticed something else. Red Thorn's thoughts contained only a single thing: insectoid aberrations. Yuan finally realized that insectoid aberrations were what Red Thorn wanted to eat. Sister Qin answered Yuan's call and said that she had insect corpses available. She could deliver them to him free of charge, since they would not be difficult for her to obtain. After ending the call, she became thoughtful. This time, Yuan had not requested spiritual materials but insect corpses instead. She grew curious about what kind of cultivation base he was establishing and began considering giving him a small test. Yuan had not expected her to actually possess the corpses. Smarty had been the one who suggested that she might have some. Shortly afterward, the delivery arrived. Yuan fed Red Thorn one of the insect corpses, but Red Thorn swallowed the entire contents of the container in a single gulp. Once it finished eating, its body began to glow. Yuan wondered whether it was about to evolve. Red Thorn was a predatory plant of the Romani Raffleaga family. Red Thorn was still at normal rank and belonged to the source type. Its ability was Ritual Mouth, which allowed it to secrete enormous quantities of digestive fluid. The liquid was highly corrosive and could rapidly digest the energy contained within food. Red Thorn poured the rest of the bucket directly into its mouth. Yuan complained about its terrible manners. Smarty added that even its saliva was corrosive, making it quite dangerous. Yuan reassured them that Red Thorn was behaving that way only because it was starving, so there was no reason to worry. Yuan realized that the creature's appetite was terrifying. The 300 corpses he had obtained would last no more than 3 days, especially once dragon beast blood was added to its diet. He began wondering whether the cash flow from his small online shop could keep up. When he checked his balance, he discovered that he had 398.2 radiant coins. It was an enormous sum. He noticed that the spirit siphon goldfish and copper rank green vines were selling exceptionally well. He would need to replenish them once again. A new message arrived from Cloudstream. She complained that she had been unable to obtain even a single strand of transparent webbing and demanded that he send her another 5 spiders as soon as possible. Immediately afterward, she transferred the payment. Yuan remarked that her luck was truly terrible. Because of that order, he would now have to restock the web-shooting spiders as well. In and Smarty overheard him and immediately demanded to come along. Yuan asked why, since he was merely going to replenish his inventory. They explained that ever since returning from the dimensional rift, they had wanted to discover how strong they truly were. Smarty added that they did not want to be helpless again if they encountered exotic insectoids. Yuan joked that in the next sudden crisis, In and Smarty might become heroes of the Radiant Federation. In became excited, declaring that this would make them unique throughout the Federation. Smarty said that was not true and told them a story. 2 years earlier, in Frost City, a member of the Radiance 100 sequence had faced a grade 3 dimensional rift alone. He held back the insect tide for 30 minutes, preventing Frost City from becoming a living hell. Yuan was impressed that Smarty knew about such an event. Smarty explained that he sometimes read old articles whenever he grew tired of studying. Yuan asked what had happened to that member of the Radiance 100 sequence afterward. Meanwhile, inside a shop, an employee argued with the owner about placing all their hopes in a store that had appeared from nowhere. Sister Qin asked whether they had a problem with her sales strategy. The employee complained that she had spent a vast amount of money purchasing dragon beast blood and was now acquiring insect corpses in enormous quantities. According to him, the buyer was merely a newly opened Starnet shop, making the entire arrangement seem irrational. They feared that if she were deceived, they would not even be able to pay the following month's salaries. At that moment, Yuan entered and remarked that the atmosphere seemed lively. He asked whether he had arrived at a bad time, since they appeared to be arguing. Sister Qin smiled and explained that it was merely a routine meeting to plan the shop's major products for the next quarter, with everyone sharing their opinions. Yuan did not pursue the matter. He said that he wanted to purchase 3,000 insect corpses. He also needed 10,000 pounds of low-grade energy or half a pound of butterfly shells, 40 normal-grade spirit siphon goldfish, and 5 level 10 elite-grade web-shooting spiders of perfect quality. He paid for everything in advance. The employees turned pale upon hearing the size of the order and learning that it had already been fully paid. Sister Qin asked why they were still standing around, introduced Yuan as a partner of their new shop, and instructed them to provide him with VIP treatment. The employees immediately became enthusiastic and assisted him with everything. Sister Qin had already expected him to restock normal-grade spirit siphon goldfish, but she believed that he might also be interested in something special. She brought out a pregnant elite-grade spirit siphon goldfish of the 5 fortunes Honshu variety. Yuan was stunned. A spirit siphon goldfish could produce more than 1,000 offspring from a single pregnancy. Under ordinary conditions, most of the eggs would fail to survive without sufficient spiritual qi, but inside the spirit lock spatial zone spirit pool, survival would not be an issue. Moreover, the 5 fortunes Honshu variety was extremely popular. Yuan purchased it without hesitation and also asked to collect the dragon beast blood he had ordered earlier. Sister Qin smiled with satisfaction, pleased that her assumption had been correct. She suspected that a creator master was supporting Yuan's shop from behind the scenes. Anyone capable of handling a pregnant 5 fortunes Honshu had to be at least a 2-star creator or higher. The prices were quickly settled. The dragon beast blood cost 240 radiant coins, while the 5 fortunes Honshu cost 80. The web shooting spiders, energy ore, and remaining materials came to another 60 radiant coins. After completing the transaction, Yuan departed. The employees escorted him to the exit, now fully aware that they had greatly underestimated Sister Qin's connections. Smarty asked where they were going next. Yuan asked whether they still wanted to test their strength. If so, they could visit the Star Tower that Uncle Dong had mentioned. The Star Tower was one of StarNet's most distinctive facilities. It offered training, simulated battles, and ranked matches. It also hosted numerous combat competitions and was widely known as a paradise for combat-type spiritual creatures. Smarty stared at the towering structure. Competitors could climb only 1 floor with each victory and were required to fight at least once every month. He had heard that a promotion match awaited challengers on the 100th floor. Winning it allowed them to enter the league and become Hall of Fame competitors. Yuan told him not to get ahead of himself, since reaching the 100th floor on their first attempt was impossible. Yuan informed the attendant that he was registering for the first time. The employee did not even raise his head from his book, merely telling Yuan to complete the form himself so the information could later be entered into the system. He also warned Yuan not to disturb him, since the creator certification examination was approaching. Smarty frowned at the man's lack of hospitality, but Yuan understood that everyone was under pressure with the examination drawing near. The form was submitted successfully, and Yuan was instructed to remain still until the scan was complete. The results identified the 100 questions beast and the soundbird as copper rank, level 1, while Mobius was elite grade, level 7, and of epic quality. Every record, matches, victories, defeats, and highest floor reached, remained at 0. The employee was surprised by Yuan's spiritual creatures, some of which he could not even recognize. Smarty remarked that he seemed to be the only one who had actually aged over the years. Yuan had originally intended to let the Lara Lily participate, but releasing Mobius's spirit lock spatial zone technically counted as part of Mobius's own ability. In asked which floor they would need to reach before facing opponents comparable to members of the Radiance 100 sequence. Yuan told her not to be so ambitious. She replied that she was merely curious. The attendant explained that such opponents could be encountered only above the 100th floor. He added that several unusual cases had appeared over the previous 2 days, so it would be best not to encounter any of those people during their first visit to the Star Tower. Yuan wondered whether that meant there was a chance of facing powerful opponents from the very beginning. In was already looking forward to it. They entered the competitors' preparation room. Inside, they could even customize the battlefield and weather conditions. Their future matchmaking would be determined by the outcome of the first battle. Their first opponent was an experienced veteran with 471 recorded matches. In asked whether that meant he was powerful. Yuan thought that was unlikely, since the highest floor the man had ever reached was only the 3rd. He had probably lost nearly every battle he fought. The battlefield was an open grassland in the morning. The weather was sunny, and there were no special mechanisms. Yuan decided to send Smarty out first. His exaggerated gestures made Smarty complain that Yuan had watched far too many cartoons. The old man on the opposite side looked as though he could barely remain standing. He was pleased to face a newcomer, since winning this match would mean he would not need to fight again for the rest of the month. Smarty tried to switch places with In, but Yuan whispered that since he was already there, he should simply handle it. He should not go easy just because the opponent was elderly. The old man warned them not to underestimate the bond between him and his ash-shelled beetle, then ordered it to use bite. Yuan was about to tell Smarty to use an ability, but Smarty had already moved. He simply stepped on the beetle. The old man let out a mournful cry, accusing the younger generation of cruelty. He said he had raised it with care, and now he would have to bury his own son. Smarty argued that this was exactly why he had wanted to switch out earlier. Yuan quickly tried to calm the old man down, explaining that spiritual creatures were not truly injured inside Starnet. Even so, Yuan felt disappointed. The battle had been far below the level he had imagined. The system generated the next arena. It was nighttime in a ruined city, with dark clouds covering the sky. The rules stated that the ruins would collapse once enough damage accumulated. A man released his yellow-spotted dog and ordered it to use scent tracking to prevent the enemy from escaping. At the same time, he commanded his tusk-digging boar to use tusk charge, aiming directly at a vital point. Yuan calmly instructed In to use sonic piercing. In struck both spiritual creatures at once. The man shouted in disbelief, questioning why a copper-rank spiritual creature had appeared on that floor. Yuan could only offer an apologetic smile as he was teleported to another area. Yuan kept repeating the man's words in his mind, but even on that floor, he still did not fully understand what the man had meant. Yuan wanted Smarty to take part in the next battle, but Smarty refused. He was frustrated that after more than 10 matches, he had not been given a chance to do anything before each fight ended. Yuan tried to comfort him, saying that they would eventually encounter an opponent worthy of them. He then checked the opponent for the next floor. The opponent was Huang Chung-lin, 27 years old, a power-type professional. He possessed 3 copper-rank spiritual creatures, a venomous fire python, an acid mist python, and a swamp python. He openly displayed their information, clearly confident in his own strength. This instantly excited both Smarty and Yuan. They would finally have a chance to show what they were capable of. They entered the arena. Chung-lin seemed surprised to see Yuan appear. He had assumed that a newcomer would have given up and withdrawn by this point. After checking Yuan's profile, he briefly wondered whether Yuan might be an expert, only to realize that he had brought nothing but a cat and a bird. He then mockingly asked whether they had come there for sightseeing. This confused the protagonist and even his spiritual creatures. To make matters worse, Yuan was a healing-type professional. Chung-lin sneered that the bird might as well build a nest on the battlefield so everyone could eat eggs and recover. Yuan felt his patience snap. He said that Chung-lin talked too much and could begin whenever he wanted. Chung-lin laughed, saying that he had not expected to encounter a newcomer so eager to lose. He declared that he had no intention of wasting time playing with a beginner and would end the battle using only 50% of his strength. Just as Yuan had suspected, a contractor's mental state directly influenced their spiritual creatures. Chung-lin's relaxed attitude had made his snakes sluggish and careless. Yuan ordered In to use sonic piercing again, this time aiming for the bellies of all 3 serpents. She sped past them and launched her razor-sharp feathers. To Yuan's surprise, one of the snakes blocked the attack by releasing a cloud of acidic mist. Chung-lin smirked and said that he might have been more cautious if the little cat had joined the fight. However, since Smarty had merely transformed into a pair of glasses, he did not consider the bird's offensive power a serious threat. Yuan shouted back that he should not underestimate them. He ordered In to charge straight ahead and strike the acid mist python directly on the nose. Chung-lin assumed that Yuan was rushing toward his own destruction. Calmly, he commanded the venomous fire python to unleash an explosive burst of flames. He remarked that Yuan should be grateful they were fighting inside Starnet. Otherwise, the little bird would not even have been left with a grave. Yuan replied that there was no reason for concern and ordered Mobius to open the spirit lock spatial zone. The flames engulfed In. Chung-lin's eyes widened when he saw that, instead of retreating, she flew directly through the attack and crashed into one of the serpents. Yuan told Chung-lin to stop holding back, because he was about to fight with everything he had. Yuan summoned the Lara Lily and activated its healing ability. Chung-lin coldly warned Yuan not to blame him for showing no mercy. The blue serpent lunged forward, and Yuan shouted for In to dodge. It released a blast of blue energy, forcing In into a desperate retreat. Yuan immediately recognized the problem. It was a 3-against-1 battle, with In alone on the field, and the pace was far too intense. Even the Lara Lily's healing spiritual chi could not sustain her much longer. Suddenly, Smarty announced that he had completed his analysis of the substances released by the venomous fire python and the acid mist python. He had even understood the principles behind their attacks. They finally had a way to counter them. Yuan immediately ordered In to attack the venomous fire python's eyes. They would eliminate one enemy first. When the green serpent released its mist toward her, In flew straight at the red serpent instead. Chung-lin dismissed the maneuver as a useless trick. He ordered the venomous fire python to intensify its flames while while the acid mist python sealed off every escape route. In became trapped between the two serpents. Yuan seized the opening and commanded her to use turbulence. In beat her wings furiously, forcing both the flames and the acidic mist backward. A stream of fire surged toward the red serpent. When the flames mixed with the surrounding mist, they triggered a violent explosion. The green serpent was instantly burned to a charred corpse. Chung Lin clicked his tongue in irritation and cursed the creature for being useless. Yuan praised In, finally understanding that real combat demanded strategy rather than brute force. At the same time, a bitter memory resurfaced in Chung Lin's mind. He had already been cast aside and ordered to abandon his dream of becoming a retainer of the Chung family. His only remaining value was to stay inside the Star Tower and monitor insignificant competitors who might one day become threats to the young master.